Here, and I will call our meeting of the Board of Selectmen, regular meeting for Wednesday, March 13th, 2024 to order. First item of business will be first Selectman remarks, and I'd like to start off today's remarks by actually introducing to everyone our new town council, town attorneys, Nick Belmonte and Ira Bloom. I think everyone remembers from previous meeting that we selected the attorneys from Birch and Moses to help us as we move forward now that Jerry Weiner has retired. And so this is the first time. Thank you very much. Welcome. And please, Nick, if you'd like to say anything.
Thank you, Mika. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I'm Nick Belmonte, Ira Bloom. Yeah, we're from Birch and Moses. We represent a lot of municipalities across the state, but this is what we do, this is what we have been doing, and this is what we love to do. So we're happy to help the town out and work with everyone going forward. So thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And we will have the attorney, our town attorney report on a monthly basis as we need to going forward. But I did want to make sure everyone understood who they were. I also wanted to mention that today we received a $3,000 check from the Bethwood baseball organization, as they do every year, which in my mind is just a tremendous thing. So Dwight Rowland was here earlier today, and he presented the check. There will be a news article in regard to that, but I just wanted to make mention of it because it's at this point in time they're upwards of $45,000 that they've given to the town, which is tremendous. It does go to help our parks, so it goes to help us to maintain the fields that they are using, so they're really kind of giving back, and it's just the organization itself, and most people who are close to those kinds of sports understand that it seems like team sports amongst children are kind of declining, and we seem to be doing real well, so thank you to those folks. I was able to participate, before Vonda comes up, able to participate in Read Across America Day earlier. I have to tell you, it's been a long time since I read to kids, since my kids are older, and it's somebody said, I heard somebody say while I was there, it's like riding a bike. I think it was you, Tony.
Yeah.
Tony was also there.
Yep.
And it was, and as Allison was as well, and it was just one of those things, once you start doing it and you see, they're sitting there looking, and it's a tremendous feeling. It was really a great event, and if you have an opportunity next year when they do it again, please take advantage of it, because you come away just feeling wonderful about it.
Charlotte said you did a great job.
I'm sorry?
Charlotte, my daughter, you read to her class.
Oh, did I?
Yes, and she said you did a great job.
It was so funny, they participate, they really get
Yeah.
into it, and, so it was fun. Really had a fun time. Wanted to remind everyone that the upcoming presidential preference primaries are April 2nd, and absentee ballots are available with the town clerk. Early voting starts on March 26th, and you should contact the town clerk or the registrar if there's any additional information that you need. There was a good deal of public comment at our last meeting when we were talking about the country club. I'd like to thank the residents for that, because it certainly helps for us to get as much input as possible when we're trying to make decisions about things. And this is an important one. We want to make sure we select the right partner to work with going forward as we try to define exactly how best to utilize our property. We do need to have this be a gem as we move forward, and I think picking the right partner is the place to start. So thank you to the public for those. And for those that I haven't responded to directly, particularly the emails, I am continuing to try to respond to everyone in terms of the emails that were sent and answer some questions that people had asked. I'll continue with that. And we'll talk a little bit more about where we are with the respondents later on in our agenda. As far as budget is concerned, I also wanted to mention that the Board of Finance did meet for their special meeting to go over some of the budget items. They now have everything that the Board of Selectmen that we presented to them. They're meeting again to finalize their portion, what they do on Wednesday, March 20th, so next week. They'll be going over the details, and that will be what goes to the public in the preliminary meeting. And that's it. We are talking to Essex Printing. The one thing I want to mention is we're talking to Essex Printing in regards to trying to establish a new hard copy newsletter of what's happening in Woodbridge and things. So that's in the progress. We're just kind of preliminary, seeing what they need to do it and how it can be done, and we'll keep you updated as far as that's concerned. With that, we'll go to our next item. Superintendent,
Thanks, it's always nice to be here.
thank you.
Welcome to a great town.
Thank you.
I'll keep it pretty brief tonight. Our enrollment is holding steady at 876 students. Again, typical pattern for this time of the year. In the spring, when families start to shift, we do tend to see our enrollment increase a little bit. I also wanted to echo the Read Across America. We had a lot of celebrity and local readers. This year we even had students from the Amity Education Club, students who are hoping to go into education. So it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for people to come into our school. And I encourage as many of you who can, I know it's in the morning, but to join us next year. And I just want to say that those children are the reason for every decision that you make in this town, and we hold that very dear. And we can have the best budgets, the best administrators, the best board of education, but without our teachers, we really have nothing. And we have outstanding teachers, and we are just so excited to bring people into our building and meet them and to see our fantastic students. So we do look forward to that day as a show-off. So just to keep you apprised of a few things, so we do have a roof project that we are, very excited will occur this summer. It's going to replace about a fourth of our roof, and I stress that because, the building started in 1960, so if you own a home, every 20 to 25 years you need to replace your roof, and so we're replacing 1/4 of it, which means at some point I'll probably still be here asking for another portion of the roof. But with that said, we are moving forward with that. We had a meeting this week, Donna Kuhn and our Director of Business Service Operations, and I met with, it's called a PCR meeting. It's a pre-bid conformance review meeting. It was many hours long and meticulous. And, they went through every piece of paper, every date, every signature, and noted to us a few things. One was that we had nothing to fix. There were a few things on the preparation and that needed a little bit of tweaking, but rare is it that somebody, gets their act together and uploads all of the signatures. So Donna Kuhn, and I want to publicly thank her, our, Director of Business Services and Operations. She ran around and got many signatures from many stakeholders in the community and really made it happen. And in public education, a business manager is a hard position to fill, and it's a shortage area, and to have one that is so skilled, really our town is fortunate. So I wanted to give her a shout out. Our meeting went swimmingly. They're gonna make some tweaks on their end, and we should have the state letter hopefully by Friday, so that we can start securing a vendor next week. We're hoping we can start that process. So we'll keep you posted, but that's exciting. And just as a reminder, we did relocate everybody in the building this summer, so rec is up at the high school. We didn't pick these locations. Jen Byers, the Amity superintendent, picked them, and she was kind enough to give us a portion of Amity Middle School Bethany. So our summer enrichment and extended school year programs will be there. And that really opens up our building and grounds for a lot of the work that has to happen, the paving, all kinds of work, so. Regarding space needs, we do have space needs over the next 10 years. We are anticipating an additional 130 plus children, and if we try to honor our class sizes, that does pose a challenge. So we continue to progress with our exploration of options. Just this week, our RFQ/P was posted publicly in all the appropriate spots to solicit interest from firms who would like to participate in that exploratory phase. I stress the word exploratory because, I keep hearing, oh, you want a new school. That actually is not one of the options that we would be looking at. So I don't have a preference. I want what is best for our learners, and what we need are architects to bid on this who have creative ideas as to how to perhaps reallocate or capitalize on space that we have, as well as consider any other little ancillary options. So I did just want to let you know that RFQ/P is out. Our timeline is roughly by around April vacation, and I'll be sharing all of this information with Mika and Tony, but we would hope to be interviewing potential firms with the Town Beecher Committee to select somebody for that work. So, no decisions made, we are just starting one step of many, and you can expect a lot of communication from me on that front. And then finally, we just, wanna thank this group and the Board of Finance for the work they've done on our budget. Our budget is in their hands. Our 3.89 was forwarded by you untouched. I really appreciate that for consideration by the Board of Finance. I understand that there are hard decisions to make, and we are all on the same team, so we certainly look at those decisions carefully and will support whatever decision you need to make for our budget. And, just, again, our capital plan, I know that there were a million things our building needed, and it was wonderful that you forwarded 3 things, one of which would be our fire panel, which is extremely out of date, and our phases for our next steps in our space exploration, as well as universal handicapped accessible. We're calling it a merry-go-round. It is not a merry-go-round with the horses, so please don't expect that. It's a playing area that kind of moves around. I will not be on it. And children with handicapped needing wheelchairs and adaptive equipment, and children who don't need any adaptive equipment can both share. It's very inclusive. So we're excited to begin to extend our play area to include more and more children. We have on average about 5% of our students who need some sort of a handicapped accessible equipment, but at any point with broken appendages and spring sports, that number creeps up on a flexible basis. And that is my report. Any questions?
Questions, comments, anything? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda will be an Earth Day update, from Hillary Drum and Jennifer Sullivan. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us. All right, so first we want to thank everybody here, because I'm pretty sure actually everyone here has been part of this process right from the beginning. And thank you to the library too, and the sustainability committee, the rest of the committee, because everyone is putting so much work into this, and we really, really appreciate the support and all the effort involved. And Allison too, especially you, because you've done so much. So, we are coming right along. We're getting a lot of exhibits, performances, all the different recycling trucks. We have electronics recycling, paper shredding, mattress recycling. We're working on textile recycling. We have a Goodwill truck as well. Other things, we have our Rid Litter Day, which has always been actually the original function of Earth Day here in Woodbridge. It's gone way back. And so Kathy Barkin is going to be doing that again with us. And then, as many of you know, we're also including all the local farms and getting them on board for a farmer's market. We're working on an EV car show. We are going to have demonstrations of the compost and rain barrels that we're selling right now. And then we have the UI has an e-mobile. It's a bus, if you've ever seen it, where kids can go, or adults can go in and see the different ways that energy is done and what can be saved and that sort of thing. It's a very fun, interactive event. We have Cyril the sorcerer, if I didn't say that already. He's a magician. Then let's see what else. We have the library has the seed exchange. We're going to be having plant swaps. And a lot of other things there. So
The magician is a sustainable magician, or he's a green magician?
He is in fact yes, he is. He works for the Waterbury Recycling Council, I believe,
Okay.
and he's from Yale, though the School of Forestry and such, and he actually
Magic with a twist.
in this magic that has to do with sustainable things. So that he has like a water show, an energy show. They're fantastic. I highly recommend it. There'll be several shows throughout the day. We have them for the whole day, so don't miss any of them. Okay.
That's wonderful that you connected with him. He and I were colleagues at Yale at one time, so I'm looking forward to
Oh, I
seeing
got him
CJ.
early.
He does quite a performance.
He does.
It's
Real, and
wonderful.
he'll actually not just do the performances. He's going to do what he called a Pied Piper thing, where he
Oh,
goes
yeah, yeah,
throughout
I've seen
and
it.
collects all the
It's
people
excellent.
to bring up
excellent.
not just children, the adults. Honestly, like it's not just for kids. I keep stressing this to people. Like it is not just for kids. He's incredible. He can capture an audience like you would not believe, and he is extremely knowledgeable. He is not just your average magician or your average recycling person.
Yeah.
So he's all built into one. So he's fantastic. We're really pleased to be able to have him. So we're working on some tag sales with the senior center as well as with some of our 55 and older community in town. And so, let's see. Do you wanna go?
The drug take. The drug
Oh,
take
yes.
back, which is a national thing that happens on that date, will be at the police department.
Yes.
Um,
We're
and-
coming up with our list of things that are happening ongoing, as well as things that will only be happening that day. So like, for
Yes.
example, something like the mattress recycling or the textile recycling, things that we have just for that day, or the paper shredding, but then also to make residents aware of things that we have all the time, like the drug take back, like some of the different religious organizations in town actually are accepting different donations of all types of things, that we have the electronics recycling all the time at the transfer station, that we wanna make all these things, we're actually gonna compile a list completely to say, you know, there's the glasses right in the front here and the Lions accept them. There's the different ways to recycle, you know, the electronics, there's different ways to recycle all of these things, and here's what you can do on a regular basis. You don't have to do it today, but, you know, if you have it another time, just so, again, keeping things sustainable all the time. So, some of the things we're having a few challenges with are actually securing all of our vendors and our food trucks, and we're hoping for some help and assistance with that, perhaps.
Is the challenge just identifying ones that can make it, or what's the challenge?
There's a couple parts, I'm glad you asked.
Or would you rather not ask?
So there is currently the process in place to secure vendors and food trucks in Woodbridge is a multi-step process that involves permitting and fingerprinting and background checking. And it's fairly extensive, and from what I've learned from other towns, different than many other towns. And so, particularly in this instance where this is a one-day event, it can sometimes be prohibitive for a food truck to say, I believe it, as far as I know, the cost is at least $75, there may be extra for the fingerprinting.
That's for the permit
Right.
with the PD, then they have to pay for the fingerprint.
Then there's so it's a multi-step, again, a multi-cost process. And so when we talked about this with the chief of police, he had suggested that perhaps this was something we can all work together to discuss what options would be possible to, again, it's a one-day event, like what can we do?
Especially
Okay.
for vendors who may not be doing a food truck where they're probably gonna sell more than $75. If
Right.
somebody is a handcrafter or something like that, and a town resident, that they have to be fingerprinted and pay quite, you know, for some people that might be a significant fee, to just come to a couple hours event. So we were hoping that we could find a way to make this workable for everybody.
I think you're talking to the right people, so. I
Right,
think
especially
it's-
like food trucks I do understand, like they may come back to Woodbridge, it may be a year's investment for that
Yes.
$75, but for some of them it might not be, so that's $75 for one day, as well as the other
So
costs.
from a food truck standpoint, you pay $75 for a year.
Yes,
So
I
if you
believe,
wanna come to another event, you're good to go.
yes, I
Plus the
believe all of these.
fingerprinting though.
Right, and
Yes,
the
I
fingerprinting
think
on
all
top
of
of
the
that.
things are good for 1 year, but it's the likelihood of how many of them are repeatable, basically.
Yes.
So, so that was one challenge, and then another challenge is in regards to we're hoping to have a beer and wine garden, and we're working to make that happen, and we sort of have some questions, I think, in regards to, we don't wanna miss out, there's some questions regarding the permitting process for that, and which ones we need, and who needs to be a part of that and what we need to do next. We wanna go in the right process for all of this and do it the right way.
So I'm used to getting permits for library programs, which I've done for years with Chief Capiello, no problem. However, it seems to be that there is also a state one that NEBCO referred to us, and so we don't want to do
Right.
too many
You don't wanna
forms,
duplicate or
fees,
under.
paperwork, et cetera, we're trying to be efficient. But we also want to abide by the law, especially when alcohol is being consumed on public property. So we're trying to be, you know, following
Again, yeah, we just
following the
wanna work-
law,
yep.
but not creating more hassles for everybody in town also, in the town departments. So,
So right, so I think with that, we just need to, we had talked to Chief Capiello about that. He wanted to make sure that that everything was approved in the proper order, I suppose, was
and
what.
he recommended we talk to the board
Yes.
of selectmen.
Talk to the board, make sure that
Which makes
that part's
sense.
approved, whatever, you know, that we have the discussion,
Is
open it
this-
up for approval, and then go from there.
Is this something that requires board approval, and gonna put you guys on the spot right out the gate here. It's not something you need to find out right now, but it's.
How's that for your first?
Mika, can I ask a question
please.
first? So I remember Betsy Ogla working on setting up this process for us, and I thought it had to do with some legal obligations and covering us, but is what you're saying that the current process that we have in place for use of the town green won't work at all for you, or what are you
Which part?
asking for?
In terms
So-
of the alcohol or in terms of the vendors?
Yeah, I think the vendors, because I
Okay.
do remember there was quite a bit of discussion on the board of
do
selectmen
remember
when
that as well.
that was happening. And if we make an exception for one group, are we obligated then to make the exception for everyone? In that case, we don't have any rules anymore. I don't know how that works.
Yeah,
That's a legal question. I'm glad we have two attorneys here tonight.
Can I just,
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, there usually is a policy, the town has a policy for, you know, these events on public property. So I'm happy to we can look at that. Maybe it provides for exceptions, exemptions, I don't know. If you don't have any policy, then you ought to adopt one. Because usually, it does get complicated. You've got insurance issues, you've got liability issues. The liquor permit is very complicated. I know you gotta go through the state, and if it's like for one day, and someone has to sign and all that, so there is a lot of paperwork, but, I think it starts with a board policy, which I
Yeah.
haven't
My
seen
understanding
yet.
is that there is a policy.
Yeah.
And if I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'd like to split it into two parts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely
One-
needs
Yeah, I
to
think
be
they're
two.
definitely
Yes,
two
they're-
separate
they're
things.
But there's process and there's cost.
Yes.
When I hear you saying one of
Yes.
the issues is process, just in
Yes.
terms of the amount that needs to be done, or you not knowing what needs to be done, and you can clarify as far as that's concerned. Then the other piece that I see is cost, and that's prohibitive for some of the vendors that you're looking for. To Sheila's point, what you do for one, sometimes that's usually one of the biggest challenges in
Yeah,
terms of what we
absolutely.
do,
Right.
is what you do for one, you have to be really careful about, not, because when the next person, why didn't we do it there, type of thing, so.
Wait, I was just gonna
Please.
say, I didn't hear you mention insurance, but usually that's one of the more onerous things that the town requires to make sure that it's in proper form, and it names the right parties and covers the right situation, so that also comes into play here, so.
I understood that to be pretty cut and
dry.
dry, though, the insurance piece of it.
Oh, yeah, that made complete sense when that was
But I mean,
forwarded
that's-
on to us.
right,
That's
that's-
not.
Yeah, I don't
But
think
there is a
there's
policy,
no
and my
issue.
understanding is that
It
that's
just
not an
seems,
issue.
I don't know, and I don't know
Good.
the reasoning behind it, and if anybody wants to jump in and explain, I don't know why we're asking residents to get fingerprinted to sell things on town property. That's just,
I think it's the child protection aspect. I think that's what the fingers is.
Certainly, we can identify the
yeah.
why
Yeah.
well,
of it,
sure, I
that's-
mean, it
and
just
that's
seems a
something that
little
we should.
counterintuitive to say,
Right.
come to this event and sell and need to do all this other things first.
All right, well, that gives us a little bit, some homework to do in terms of checking with the police department, identifying those types of items.
Yeah, there's a packet for each, there's a packet that's specifically for, food vendors and food trucks.
Yes.
And then there's a packet that's specifically for hawkers and
And
peddlers.
peddlers.
I did clarify that indeed qualified, and it did.
The packet comes from the town or the police?
No, that's
or-
ours.
Police department, I
police.
believe.
Yes.
So
And as
it's-
Tony said, Ira, you might have missed it, go on.
I think we have a hawking and peddling ordinance or something.
It's fantastic.
I think it's good.
The language comes from the enabling statute. A lot of municipalities have something like that, but everyone's always like, hawking, peddling, or?
What is that?
Doing like a push, yes.
But now let's talk about how we care for this. So your event is the 27th of April. If you're really
Yes.
gonna get these people,
So at the moment, we've actually proceeded with, I'm giving them those packets. So,
are you getting a lot of yeses?
so it just came, it started as of Sunday, I would say I probably sent out, goodness, 50 plus of them. I've gotten back at least 10 at this point. I haven't had anyone complain openly.
Okay,
But nonetheless, I figure it's at least worth there could be people who are delaying because of the cost issue. I don't wanna at the last minute not have any food vendors or other vendors because of this issue. And from what we've been told cause we looked into like the Bethany Harvest Festival and the Bethany Flea Market and things that are in surrounding towns, and everyone is saying, oh no, there's nothing like this anywhere else.
And also just the steps involved to get fingerprinted is not, you just
Right, it's
don't
a-
go to any,
It's a process.
you have to make an appointment, you do it during business hours,
Right.
we're all
Okay.
working people, we know how difficult it is, that's a little challenging.
I will say that it does say $75 in the ordinance,
Yeah.
so.
And do we know what that cost is supposed to cover, technically?
It says for each year, for all licenses related to hawking and peddling, it gives a time of day, a few items here.
I guess my question is, when we have farmer markets, which I've known we've done in the past, do those apply for that type of?
They do not.
No, that was under a different, I looked
Ah,
back
okay.
We checked into that
into
because
the
we
old
do not.
records from the library, and it was under a different, statute through like the Department of Agriculture, or whatever the state equivalent is.
So somehow that is exempt, but any food vendors
Right,
that are
prepared
food trucks,
foods.
or if you,
Oh,
like the
need
way
the
the
health
Cafe Rebelle, they used to
inspector.
have the tent
The
and the
tent.
tables,
It
that
does say
still
that in
counts
here.
as that.
Yeah.
Farmers markets are exempt, it says in here.
And they do need separate, there are separate rules through QVHD that
Yes.
are,
So-
Are
there's a lot,
associated with
there's
that,
a lot of
sure.
rules.
Yeah, the farmer's
All
market
this.
part,
Yeah.
they did have to have their own insurance with the town for certain amounts. They did have to have everything checked through QVHD.
Right.
As I say, still would know.
Yeah.
Did you also check with the recreation department? Because in the past, when
Yes.
we've had vendors on the green, it was through recreation that it was all credentialed, I think, and arranged.
I did. But it seemed to be more food focused, and
Right.
they had said that, oh, nobody ever sells anything. So,
It seemed to
okay,
be a
I
bit-
took them for their word,
Oh, no, we had
besides the
the-
food.
We have the trucks.
The ice cream truck.
Right,
Yeah,
the
we do
food
have-
trucks,
Yeah,
they
the
do,
food
the
trucks. That's
food
what they
trucks
meant.
do that whole process.
Yeah.
They do.
Okay.
Yes.
But again, they're
Oh, yeah.
actually there, so remember the concerts there's 4 of them, so they're paying that $75 fee to come for 4.
Yeah,
And
Whereas
any
we're
other
saying-
town events
and, yeah.
that they wanna swing by, and they also
Right.
pay a sponsorship fee.
Yeah.
But, as Rec told me, they usually make it back plus, fourfold in like one concert, so it
The food
is
trucks makes a little
lucrative
bit
for
more
a
sense
food
than-
truck
yeah.
that has a great following.
Particularly for the concerts that are, like you said,
Yes, and if they pay
4
now,
times minimum.
they
Yeah.
pay the fingerprinting fee in March or early April, they're covered for the rest of the, because it's a calendar year, it is not a
Got it.
continuous year. So they would be covered for the rest of the concerts, if they wanted to come to Woodbridge like me, anything else that goes on. But for the vendors, like just people selling things, that is where it gets a little,
Or if people are just a
Gray.
if they were only coming
Okay.
for this event.
yes.
In the ordinance, is the fingerprinting expires in a year?
I believe so.
Yes.
I didn't immediately see anything about fingerprinting in there, I don't know if you see.
No,
No.
not finding fingerprinting in the ordinances.
can I just,
That might be, oh, sorry, Sheila, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, just back up for a moment, did you guys submit the application to use the property and we've already acted on that? I just
Yes,
wanna make
that
sure.
was February.
Okay, that was in February, all right. So that was, and so that was part of that application process. This is what Betsy had set up, was the application process. It didn't come to us until it was, everything about the event was detailed in the application, is that right?
Yeah.
Just not recalling it.
No, that's okay, and it might also be because we were not here, we submitted it as a memo, and it went under the consent agenda,
Oh, okay.
so that's why we came tonight also to clear up anything as well. But I will say, the vendor
So-
process and the food truck process, there seemed to be a lot of not conflicting info, but merging info, and like one thing says to refer to another document, and then you click on that and the link is broken, or it doesn't have all the full info, so it almost like, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna be the librarian now, there needs to be more
Yeah.
organization and some,
Exactly.
just like, maybe it needs to be exact separate and not one refers to the other and then back, because that was where some of the confusion also came when I was reviewing it to send to vendors or to food truck folks, and I was getting more and more confused trying to figure out what to tell people to do the appropriate thing.
We'll take a look at what the
Okay.
policies are to try to help you, just in terms of helping you understand. The chances are, if there's an ordinance that says this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do,
Sure.
plain and simple. So, But if there's some latitude as relates to fingerprinting and things of that nature, we'll identify what it is and then try to determine what we can do going forward. Does the board feel that that's a good course of action in terms of going forward? But I'm not here for a couple of days, but on Monday, if I can reach out to you, have our staff reach out to you and kind of iron out some of the hurdles that you're facing and identify how they play into what the policies actually are, and then make a decision as to, where we gotta go and determine if there's anything that needs to be done in terms of approvals. We don't meet again until the April 8th, I think it is. I think the first, April 10th? So that's really close to your date.
2.5 weeks.
So that's the other thing we need to consider as to how we manage that piece of it. So I think if Monday we can get something going so as to understand, and between now and then, we can have you take a look at, we can have some staff take a look at it and see, specifically consult with our attorneys, make sure that everything is, just to define exactly what it is, so you know what it is, and then we'll figure out what we have to do if there's anything that's in a gray area that we need to worry about or care for.
Yep.
Is that okay, everyone? Thank you. What else?
Just, I guess, the alcohol process,
Oh, yeah, we have to go back to that.
yes.
That seems more challenging from a state perspective than from a local perspective.
So, I don't think okay. I think where we are with the alcohol is, we wanted to confirm that was part of the consent agenda before, so that it was.
I didn't know, from what I remember, I didn't know that you had decided on that at that point in time.
Okay. So I guess we need to clarify that. Okay.
I can pull it up from
Okay.
the last meeting if you want.
Appreciate
to
it,
find
please.
memo, I can pull it
Okay.
up.
Thank you.
But go on,
So-
Hillary, what's the next thing?
So we just needed to know, because I understand that then the final approval, the process of this was, it goes to the Board of Selectmen first and then to the Chief of Police, is that correct? Am I right in the process here?
Process of what, I'm
For
sorry?
alcohol approval, if that's an option.
I've not been involved with an event on town property that we had alcohol, so I
Okay.
can't say
We
for
don't
certain.
Wasn't-
know if
wasn't
there
that-
has been one.
Yeah,
That
it
is
wasn't
the
that long
other-
ago, we were a dry
So that-
town.
Yes.
So-
Yeah. So this may be,
You want me to read the memo, just so you, the one you
Please.
submitted? It said, you asked to use the green, the gazebo, the library lawn, the grove, and parking lot Saturday, April 27th, tentatively from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. for the townwide Earth Day. Actual event 10 to 3, estimated audience is unknown. Free event, and then sale, and you highlighted the sales/consumption of alcohol is pending. Email from Chief Frank regarding approval.
Yes.
See also police coverage discussion to come when event gets closer.
Yes.
Thank you for your consideration.
have you gotten the
So he
assent
said he
from the
was waiting
chief?
for you guys. Everybody's waiting for everybody else.
If I'm understanding that correctly, that says we assented with his approval. I'll talk to the chief.
Fantastic,
Okay.
that would be wonderful. And then from there, we just need to know, once we know if it's a yes or a no, then we need to know if we need to move ahead with the permit process. I believe we need to check with the police, cause there's a permit in that regard, and then I think we also need to make sure that if that is the final end all be all, or if their one covers the state one too, or if we need to submit a separate one to the state. If it is the state one, I know which one we need to use and what the process is for that. We
Okay.
just need to know if we're the ones submitting it or if the police are.
Questions?
If it's okay.
So the only other caution I would put out is that if the public is going to consume alcohol on the green, I think we'll have to be very clear that that is not something that can be done at all times unless that's going to be our intention. Because there's always been questions when we're having the concerts on the green, is it okay to have your bottles, your blanket and that kind of thing?
If I understand correctly, what we're talking about
Just wanna
here
be
is a
careful.
confined area that's
Yes.
It would be
specific
an actual
to.
beer garden that is roped
So
off.
I
and
talked
with
to-
supervision.
I
Certainly
talked to-
without children there, yeah.
Yes, no, and I talked to the North Branford Rec Department because of the Potato Festival, and they had started serving alcohol, so I wanted to see how another town did it. And they definitely had it roped off, with people monitoring the inflow and outflow to make sure nobody's passing things over the fence, making sure that nobody is over imbibing. And they've done it for several years, and I think it's gone well. So,
Okay. I will check with Frank to see with the chief of police to see exactly where he stands on this and, report back.
Fantastic.
And, in the future, we just need to be a little bit, we probably have to have more discussion than we had through the consent agenda on this is really where I'm feeling,
Okay.
you know, so it's, I appreciate you letting us know all the issues and challenges, and we'll do whatever we can to help get those resolved as quickly as possible.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think with all of this, it's.
And we're gonna learn a lot as a result.
Right. We're
Exactly.
thinking of all of these things as this is the first of many wonderful
Right.
celebrations like this. So we're paving the way, and whatever is decided, we're very happy with everyone's participation and contribution and support. So like, we just need to know one way or the other.
We'd rather do the
Yeah,
hard
we
work
want-
now,
yeah.
so that, for again, for Woodbridge, like me in the fall, if any of this can carry over, wonderful, then that's less work, DEI
have to
and
do.
myself have to do, and for next year and the year after, and any
And for
other
any other
town
events,
events.
right.
So we'd rather get all these policies and things hammered out and take the time now versus
I appreciate it.
reinventing the wheel every year. Thank you.
Thank
Folks,
you.
other thoughts, comments?
Thank you for all your hard work and background gathering on all of this.
And for your
Appreciate it.
ambition.
Yeah.
It's sounding like it's gonna be quite an event. Thank you very much.
So,
So, thank you. Is there anything else? Are you good?
I think.
I think we're
think
good,
we're good.
unless
Thank
there's
you.
any other questions.
Very much looking forward to the event. And expect by end of business day Monday
Great.
for some information, and if you haven't gotten it, please reach out.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I look toward Karen and Allison.
We know, we've noticed, we've been taking notes.
All right, our next item on the agenda is a consent agenda, which I'm gonna look at real carefully now.
Renewed interest in our consent agenda.
So,
I actually did have a question, Mika. The update for the POCD consultant from TPZ is actually a request for us to approve. So I wondered if that should be pulled separate so that we would vote on that and they would.
actually, we do need to vote on that. That should be separate.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing it up.
All right, so I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda with the removal of update to POCD
I
consultant.
think do I need to read this before we do that?
Sure, you can do that.
Yeah, it's process.
Just don't read that last one because we pulled it out.
All board members have received and reviewed the items on the consent agenda. Are there any requests to remove items from the consent agenda?
There's the
Yes,
request.
there is. I will now read all the consent agenda items. Oh, I'm sorry, now make your motion, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda with the removal of the last item listed under D, update to POCD consultant from TPZ.
I will David, go ahead.
Sure. I'm not here.
Is there any additional discussion in regards to that? All in favor? Aye. Okay, with that removed, I will now read the consent agenda items and call for a motion to approve the refund of the property taxes for the amount of $7,087.18 in accordance with state statute 12-129 and the minutes from the Board of Selectmen meeting on February 14th, 2024, February 21st, 2024, and February 28th, 2024. We will not include the acknowledgement receipt of town clerk report, as we will need to vote on that.
Wait, which one was that?
We will not do the last item, the acknowledged receipt of the
You
824.
will, yeah, but you'll acknowledge the town clerk's report and the 824 from Massaro.
And we will
Right.
acknowledge town clerk's report, the 824 Massaro High Tunnel, and the update,
Not the update.
not the update, thank you. Acknowledge receipt of the town clerk's report, the 824 Massaro High Tunnel, and we will not do the POCD consultant from TPZ. Thank you. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Now, having removed the update of the POCD consultant from TPZ, we need to have that as a separate agenda item.
So I'll make a motion that we add to the agenda approval of the request from TPZ regarding POCD consultant.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. So, is there somebody present to provide that update?
No, TMPZ, Chris gave me those, letters, and I was told that they were just
So everyone, have you seen that? Have you seen the memos?
It's in
the
your,
board.
the packet, or memos.
Yeah, the memos, yeah.
Right, so tonight we're not hiring. Because do we need some sort of funds transfer in order to hire?
No, we have the
No, we have it in our
$20,000
budget.
for this, the way they,
So
the
it's
way
in the
they
Board of
proposed
Selectmen's-
it, they,
Yeah.
we have
Correct.
the funding in
Yeah.
this year's budget to do what they said was part of the beginning.
So-
I'd like to get them started as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and when I read it, I thought the recommendation was that we go ahead and make the motion to hire.
Correct.
So I'm ready to do that unless anyone's got.
Nope, that's exactly what I was
Okay.
looking for, so.
So I'll make a motion that we enter into contract with the recommended vendor for POCD consultant for TPZ.
I'll second. Any discussion? Does everyone understand? I'll start. Everyone understands what we're doing and why we're doing it? And
I guess my only question was there any possibility of combining that service with what we could potentially be going forward with the country club?
not in terms of what the RFP states. The
Okay.
RFP was very specific to POCD, and that's actually what we're voting on. That's
Okay.
not to say, as we engage our consultants, the consultants we're going to be,
Mhm.
that we can't make sure that they understand that that's very much an integral part of what our POCD is what they're gonna be doing in POCD.
Okay.
But for this vote, it's truly related to hiring these folks specifically for the POCD function.
Right. So my understanding of what they've presented to TPZ is that they intend to have some joint meetings, including with the Board of Selectmen. So I think at that time, we would be able to have some discussion with them about how they foresee this project going forward. But this is to get them under contract and get them going. And we're facing a pretty tight deadline because it's next May that it has to be finalized and approved after going to public hearing. So we'll get them
Good question.
started.
Good question.
And this is the same vendor with a slightly different name than
Correct.
did the current POCD. So
Okay.
it had been Malone and McBroom, and this is just a different name.
Which should help us in terms of their knowledge and what we need to do, so. Any other questions or comments? All in favor of hiring SLR as our vendor for the POCD? Unanimous? Motion carries? Thank you. Tony, we have 15 minutes. I think
Okay,
we'll continue with our agenda.
thank you. So I have your monthly report through February of 2024. We have a year-end budget surplus of about $1.12 million. That in our budget, we allocate $800,000 from our fund balance. So in actual, at the end of the year, our fund balance should increase slightly by a little over $300,000. So each year in our budget, we budget to allocate some money from our fund balance to balance the budget. That would leave our fund balance at about a little under 15% of our expenditures for the year. We continue to have three main sources of our surplus. First is interest income, which is about $340,000 surplus. Our current rates are about 5.5% on various investments that we have. Secondly, the intergovernmental revenue is a surplus of $230,000. That's largely from our municipal revenue sharing account contribution. It was not anticipated during the budget process, and I'm told it's removed from next year's budget. So we shouldn't anticipate it next year. I was surprised it survived this year, actually. So we'll follow that as the budget process unwinds up in Hartford. Those are our revenue highlights. On our expenditures, we had a 2.5% cost of living adjustment for AFSCME and non-union personnel that it was not funded in the original budgets for the start of the year because we hadn't settled our contracts. Since we have settled those contracts, there will be a contingency request necessary for some of the departments based on their activity this year. Some may not need it based on if they've had a vacancy in their department, if they've had some other issues in their department which allowed them to have some surplus. Then in some departments we don't have to transfer the entire amount. So I'm just sort of going through all that and hope to have that next month for your consideration. We've talked about last month the Police department had in their budget $90,000 from the Bridge Board of Education for their SRO, which the school is no longer using a police officer, so the police department may have a slight budget deficit, although they did have a number of vacancies earlier in the year, which may close that gap. So I'm not sure they not need to transfer much, if at all. But I just want to keep you on abreast of that information. Our retirement account is holding steady at about $175,000 surplus due to restructuring of the municipal employees retirement system up in Hartford. So we saved some money with that restructuring. We do have some coverage changes in our healthcare, where some folks went from either single to married or married to family, which causes a slight deficit there. But we should be a surplus about $100,000 there. And finally, we received a credit of $463,000 from the Amity in their March payment. So that's from their 2023 operations. So it's largely the interest income, the state grant, and the Amity credit, which is where most of that surplus comes from.
Tony, do we have a target of percent of annual expenses that we're trying to maintain?
So our current target's about 14%. So it's a little over.
Do we have a
We have a fund balance.
policy?
We do,
or-
yeah, we have a fund balance policy. That we do have a fund balance policy.
Okay,
It's in the
and what's the range for that, do you remember?
I know that the upside of the range is 14, the lowest, maybe 8. I'm not sure, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I know
But-
we're bumping up against the
I mean, I know
upper
that
end.
it's great when we end up with these surpluses, because I know how we budget very closely.
Mhm.
But it does seem that since our annual expenses go up every year, we
Logically, the fund balance, as your annual expenses go up every year, that percentage goes up every year.
Yeah.
As a
I mean,
fixed amount.
we would have to have a surplus every year to add.
Keep up with it.
Or our percentage would be dropping. Like if our fund balance were static,
So the way you control.
it would be going down as a percentage
That's
of
true,
budget.
that's true. The way you control that typically is the amount you allocate from your fund balance in the budget process. Last year, we went from 400 to 800,000.
Right.
And
There was a reason for that.
That was an acknowledgement of the fact that we were receiving the Amity surplus
Right.
through a credit from their operations. Now, next year, there probably won't, I'm told there's not much of a surplus, if at all, next year, but we'll probably still keep that 800,000. So, but yeah, you can certainly discuss that in the budget, that's what that's for, to
I was just wondering how we kept up with it, in terms of maintaining a level that we'd like, because it seems like you have to over budget or something or just really squeeze blood out of rocks.
we do some of that.
Tony, can you help me understand if we do receive the intergovernmental revenue surplus, what that would mean for our
means-
fiscal year?
Sure,
and-
so what it means is that we had anticipated receiving, I'll tell you right now, 1.398, almost $1.4 million, and we received $1.64 million. So that's why it shows up as a surplus in revenues, because we received more than we had budgeted.
So it wouldn't really, it could affect our mill rate, our tax.
So the way it would affect
Benefit.
your, because it's in the current year, the way it would affect your mill rate is, as David indicated, how you can adjust you could do a number of things. You could
Okay.
either pay for projects in the budget, you could adjust your contribution from fund balance, you could.
And we'd have that flexibility even though
There's a
it happened
process for
after
it.
our budgeting?
Yeah, there's a
Okay.
process for that
Okay.
outlined in the charter to do that. And, it's not unusual, some towns have a lot higher of a fund balance of a percentage, some have lower. We have a high reliance on property taxes, in particular real estate from homes, not as much commercial. Some towns with a broad commercial base may have a lower fund balance as a result, because we're so reliant on one type of revenue.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, Tony, the policies that you mentioned that's something that the Board of Finance.
Board of Finance reviews them on a regular basis. Matter of fact, they just reviewed the fund balance policy, the debt policy. Those are the two they just reviewed.
And those are all included in the audit document that you share with us on an
Yeah,
annual basis?
they're in the budget as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay.
the budget document,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it certainly is consideration for the Board of Finance.
We have a number of financial policies that they review on a regular basis. So each month, they're gonna start to review 2 of our policies and go through them all, and make adjustments as they see necessary.
Great.
Additional questions?
I actually have one other question, only because I just recently heard that there's some sort of shortfall at the state level with regard to the education cost sharing. Do we
Mhm.
have any information? I don't know if the town necessarily would get that, or
I haven't been,
Should
is it
ask
for,
them.
you mean for the current year or for next year?
I
Do you
think
know?
it's for next year.
For next year, they changed, they underfunded the ECS grants. So whereas before we would get a percentage, from special services back, they're expecting that to drop and they're trying to figure out how that's gonna drop, but
So
we
this
can
for the
pretty much,
excess cost grant? Yes, that I did hear about.
Yeah.
Actually, Donna's been keeping me updated on that.
yeah.
And so we were conservative on our estimate in the budget next year as a result. So I think she said should still be okay in our, based on where she sees the activity and where she anticipates the funding, I think she said our budget is currently okay.
That was actually what I was gonna ask, is this something we should be, or actually the Board of Finance should be thinking about, but you think it's well
Yeah.
in hand at this point?
Right.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anything else, Tony?
That's it for the monthly report.
Thank you. I'm gonna pick up a question because I wasn't sure, Andrea, if I was picking up in terms of what you were asking. Is it possible for us to do something that'll impact on this year's mill rate, this coming year's mill rate, is where you were going with that? And if we were to do that, we would basically be using funds out of the fund balance
Correct.
to mitigate the percentage,
That's
which
correct.
is feasible. And it's something that, for example, the Board of Finance might want to consider.
Correct.
So,
Yeah, they can, certainly the Board of Finance can do that.
thank you. Is that it?
That's it.
Your report's all set?
Yep.
All right.
And you have,
We've got funding.
public comment coming up.
Funding requests.
Yeah.
There are no funding requests.
And then
We're
we've got
done, right?
charging rates and expressing.
That's
Yep.
more of a discussion, the charging rates. I don't know if you wanna.
Want to talk about charging?
Yeah.
Next item we're going to talk about is charging rates.
Yep.
It's under yours, so I didn't want to steal your thunder.
That's okay. Just an update on the EV chargers. So Karen has done a lot of work with me on this. We have 2 EV chargers in town. One's at Town Hall, one's in the library. The Town Hall one is operational and is ready for to accept credit cards. The one at the library, we're hoping is maybe a week out. There was a slightly different model, and we had to update some of the equipment inside. I think we're talking maybe a week or so until that will be ready, probably, right? Yeah. And then they'll be ready to accept credit cards. We just have to upload some software to be able to do that as well. So we did a survey, and just to let you know, and it sort of ties into the next item, but our current rate for, we pay roughly between 18 and 20 cents per kilowatt hour for each of the facilities, depending on the energy and whether it's peak or off peak. There's a lot of factors involved. So we did a survey of chargers around the state, and most chargers charge per kilowatt hour, which is based on usage. So the average seems to be about a little under 30 cents per kilowatt hour. The state is at 32 cents per kilowatt hour. As you can see in the chart, was attached to the survey that Karen put together. Some places charge an idling charge, which means that if you use it and then you're fully charged and you're taking up space on the charger, you get charged an hourly amount until you move your car, because then other people can't
That's a
use the
nice
charger.
feature. It's an important consideration when you don't have many
Right,
chargers.
definitely, yeah. And so those were all over the map, from $2 an hour to $10 an hour, and so we thought that was a good thing. And some have a grace period, between when you finish charging and when you start incurring the idle time. So we figured a half hour
Yeah.
is probably a good
How,
idea.
how is that monitored?
It's monitored in the software.
You're still plugged in?
You're still plugged in, yeah.
Got it.
And it's got your credit card information, so it'll
That's-
start charging.
Computers.
Usually on $1.
Wonderful.
So like if you're there, if you're there, 1 minute over, you get charged the $10 as opposed to.
Sounds like a bank.
At least that's how a lot of them work.
Just by a day, you get $100 worth of interest.
So we have to determine how much we're gonna charge, and you'd have to set that rate, and then we'd have to advertise it. You probably wanna do some outreach to let folks know that we're gonna be doing this, and get some signage for each of the units.
Do you know, how do you, I mean, other than advertising it, if you just pull up
We'll have a sign on it, on the charger.
the sign that tells you how much it's costing?
Correct.
to-
Yeah, how much it's
There's-
costing,
Probably a QR code that links you to an
I'm
app,
sure, yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
all.
yeah. Karen, what was the name
You
of
gotta
it?
all
get
right
in the car,
there.
It probably tells you, the car probably tells you.
Plug share.
You plug in.
So if you go to plugshare.com, plugshare.com, it gives you all the EV chargers in the state and how much they charge. Well, most of them, right?
A lot of them don't have
But they don't tell you how much they charge.
what they charge,
Yeah.
but there's a lot that let you know. And there's the superchargers that charge faster, and of course, that's more expensive, higher item charges.
I'm wondering if they don't advertise what they charge because the rate changes depending on the time of day, which
It could be.
sometimes happens, so I don't know if we pay the same rate.
We pay the
until-
same generation rate regardless of the time of day,
Okay.
because we have that fixed. But the thing that changes is the delivery charge will change based on time of day or peak or off-peak or time part of, the season or whatever.
Does the
That changes.
software have the ability to keep track of that? Like, should there be a pay scale
There-
or
you
rate
could,
scale?
right? It could get complicated, but
Yeah.
we didn't find that most places did that. They usually fixed one rate, one average rate.
And, okay, based on the rain.
Right.
Based on, okay.
Yeah.
So I wondered if there's a way for us, so I think I understand that the idea here is obviously to not only recoup our costs, but also the overhead that it will take to track it
Right.
and all that.
Occasionally someone drives away with the charger in their car.
I can imagine there's fees involved in that.
That happens on occasion.
But I guess what I'm wondering is, for people using it, I don't know if our municipal rate for this electricity, is this considerably less than a homeowner would be charged if they were just plugging it at home instead?
Well,
Is this saving them money to use ours?
I'm not sure what different homeowners pay, but ours, I told what ours is, but ours is 7.9 cents per, that's the generation rate.
Okay. And is that, do you think that because it's a municipal generation
Well,
rate?
we do
it's-
get bulk rate and we,
Right, right.
we,
So I wondered if it would be of interest to set this rate. I mean, I think I understand that having chargers available for people who are traveling through Woodbridge or in Woodbridge
the intent
and
was
can't get
originally,
home.
so you can park your car and charge it while you go into town hall, or if you go into the library, and then you charge it for a bit, and then you leave. And then different people can.
Right.
That was the intent of it, not to keep it there for 4 hours. while
It doesn't
it's
seem
charged.
that as if that's the way it's being used, which is
No.
the reason that we're looking to go into going in this direction.
Right, so if we set the rate, I guess you're gonna make a recommendation at a future meeting for what.
Well,
the
no, we
future
were gonna
is.
say it today.
We have a
Do today.
recommendation.
Our recommendation that we all
What is-
discussed was 29 cents per kilowatt hour, it's just about the average, with a $5 idling charge after a 30-minute grace period.
That's a 20.
I'm sorry?
That's a 20-minute grace period is what I have on there.
Yeah,
We
we're
had talked originally about a
20
20-minute.
minutes or 30 minutes.
Right.
I'm sorry, what would the fine be after
It's
$5 per
$5,
hour?
yeah.
Okay, is that in our documents, or what are you guys reading?
On page 2 of that EV charging document,
Yeah, it's on page
the
2.
rates, the
Yeah.
suggested rates are there.
But
So
I
with the
didn't see
idle-
our proposed.
No, we
Yeah,
didn't, we
that's
didn't.
what I
Oh,
was
that's true.
supposed
There you go.
No, there was no
I was like,
recommendation.
I was-
Am I
that was
really
the
not
average,
seeing it and
yes.
seeing her?
The recommendation
saw
we
all the
discussed internally in Karen doing the analysis was the 29 cents.
Yeah.
And the $5 after.
Okay,
We
And-
said 20 minutes, we said half an hour, so that's what we're bringing to the board is from a recommendation standpoint.
$5 per
Hour.
hour
After
Or
you're
any
fully
part
charged,
of-
after a half-hour grace period.
half-hour grace
Yeah,
period.
we could do half hour.
Is there a reason that you deviated from the $10? I don't know if this is an average or,
That was the high side of the scale, and we
Okay.
decided we wanted to kind of be in the middle to start off with.
okay. And so I'm understanding this correctly, are we viewing this as a revenue generating opportunity?
It's interesting because if you look at the difference between the expense, you're talking 10 cents per, a little over 10 cents per kilowatt hour, somewhere between actually 8 and 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And I can't recall, I remember we talked about possibly finding out what the usage was, but I don't know if that was feasible, if that was possible. So not necessarily, Andrea, this is, and the reality from my perspective is that we would still want to make it a convenience. We don't want to make it prohibitive for people to use it because the intent was to make it a convenience to begin with. It's just, folks are parking overnight, folks are, are staying there
All
longer
day,
than,
yeah.
all day. And it's generally been recognizable cars, you know what I mean?
Clogging up the parking lot.
So,
One-
well, if everybody uses it consistently, that would be a wonderful thing if it was different cars, but it seems to be the same cars a lot of the time. And it could be just coming in at the same time every day, that type of thing there, so
And are we subject to change this?
Yes.
And at what frequency?
it's up to us,
Okay.
it's up to us.
So
Did
we're gonna be, our current electricity rates expire in October. That's actually next on the agenda. So depending on what we're paying and how much they go up, if they go up, we can revisit the rate at that time.
Right.
We could also, report back to you in say 3 months to see how it's going and how much use it's getting.
Probably be good, yeah,
Yeah.
because people's use is surely gonna be altered by the fact that they're paying and then not paying now. So
Right,
I agree.
correct,
Yeah.
agreed.
we'll have to see.
Free versus paying what it costs.
Yeah, and I like the idea of, trying to ensure that if you're literally coming through town and you're running out of charge and you need to come here, if all the chargers are being used, that's not very
Right.
convenient.
That'd be a good thing, I agree with you.
Yeah, yeah.
As a point of clarification, the 2 chargers, are they superchargers or are they
No,
not?
they're
They're not,
not.
okay. And there are a bunch of superchargers going in at the Walgreens.
Yes.
Which is not in Woodbridge.
I think they're specifically Tesla chargers, if I remember correctly,
There are,
adapters. that you can use.
adapters that
Yeah.
can, but
Any additional thoughts, discussion? Again, the recommendation that we would make is 29 cents per kilowatt hour. It's less than the state rate, like you were saying, in terms
Yep.
of the bulk rate, what our rate is. If the state rate is at 32 cents, and I would think they would be getting a better rate than us.
Right.
Our rate at 29 cents, I think, is reasonable for our residents, so that it might be convenient for people, and they're not don't want to make it too high, so it's prohibitive. So I'd rather go to a gas station, or, like a station, than use it here if I'm at the library, so.
And the understanding is this covers our cost, so we're
It's
not.
Yes.
more than
So,
covered,
okay.
with some margin, exactly like you said, for administrative and maintenance.
The software
Everything.
charges we'll have,
Right,
some minor software charges.
and we will monitor to make sure that it does indeed cover our costs.
Do we frequently have to deal with, breakage? Like somebody drives off, like you said, forgets that
How many
it's
times
plugged
did you
in.
say that's happened? Quite a few times. Well, there was one time it was happening, like, it seemed like it happened 2 or 3 times in 1 year,
Yeah.
I remember.
Can you put a
The one
camera
at
on
the
it and
library.
get the license plate if that happens, and then,
Well, if
follow
you've
up?
got, you would know who it is if
Yeah,
they
they're
put a
charging.
credit card in.
Yeah.
Well, we will
There you
now.
You will now,
all
yeah.
right, so we're not gonna have this problem anymore.
We-
So, so will you have a separate fee for that? Like the person would have to be responsible for replacement cost?
I suppose we could revisit that at that time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely. It's what-
you got, in order to charge them on that credit card, you've gotta kinda set.
Let them know that
Yeah.
that could happen.
Yeah,
I think this is a good starting point for all of that and be interesting to see in a couple of months what,
Sure.
what the finances are and how this shakes out.
Maybe nobody will use it anymore. If it's, who knows?
It's nice to have them available, and as somebody mentioned earlier, sometimes you're driving through and you need one.
Sure.
A lot of them don't do overnight, like, there's a ton of them at car dealerships, and they're not all available after hours. So sometimes you are desperate to find one, and if it's here, people will use it. And also, as I say, if it's not prohibitive from a pricing standpoint, if you're at the library, why not plug in? So,
I also think it's helpful, I mean, I have card that also needs to be charged, and just, you know, driving the kids around the state, you're always looking for a place, and you're
Right.
looking for a place that's safe and a place that's well lit, in addition to the cost. So the fact that you're near the police station there and that it's well lit, is attractive to people who may need to charge up, you know, as they're
That's a good
taking
point.
care of things. So it's a safe place to charge.
Not to complicate things, but could you have a resident versus out of resident rate?
I don't know the answer to that.
Don't know how you measure, how you, you know, I mean, you'd have to.
I don't know if you have to put in your
Credit card.
license.
The software is generally allowed like discount codes. So we have one at Sorrow Farm, and you can put in a code. So, you know, if we didn't want to charge ourselves for an electric vehicle, you could have a code, but it is a little bit complicated to do. So you'd make that available to the public, which would be complicated. And I know we might be running against time, and we've got people waiting for public comment. Do we want to move on this, or pause this discussion
Need a
so we
motion.
can move to? You want to have the motion on the yeah. So I've got a motion to adopt an EV charging rate of 29 cents per kilowatt hour and an $5 per hour idling fee following a 30-minute grace period.
Can we
Cool.
add to that motion to
Go on.
look back in a couple months to see, once we have some data, to maybe make
Sure.
a more informed decision?
Which we will review in 3 months to determine what,
I appreciate
what
that.
usage.
Do you have a
Yes,
starting time for this? Because
That's
we do
good.
need to.
Yeah.
we do not.
That's good.
We don't,
Indeed.
in other words, once we have this, we can start moving, we can look to see how long does it take us to get whatever signage is required.
Right.
In terms of making it active,
So
We can do that
this
tomorrow.
is just what we're going to do when we decide to go active.
correct. We're going, once we get this, at that point in time, we can push through the other elements that need to happen.
So with this vote, are we authorizing this to take place as soon as feasible?
Correct.
Is that, can we add that phrase to the motion maybe,
It's agreeable.
to begin charging as soon as feasible?
Sounds good.
I agree.
And then I wondered if we could also have, and explore the possibility of also having a charge in case there's accidental damage to the,
Yeah, that's worth,
Add that in
that's
as
worth
well.
looking at, Karen. I
Yeah.
think if there's some way we can identify that, I agree.
yeah, to cover the cost
Yeah.
of accidental damage.
Want to reread that motion so we know what
Absolutely.
somebody's
So
seconding?
our motion is to adopt an EV charging rate of 29 cents per kilowatt hour and a $5 idling fee following a 30-minute grace period. This is to take place as soon as is feasible, and that we will revisit this in 3 months' time. We'll also investigate repair.
3 months from the time
3 months
we
from the time it's
we begin.
Yes, from the time it begins, and we will investigate repair damages, fee assessments possibilities.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
As far as discussion is concerned, we will on every communication that we have, that we put out from an online, you know, particularly the online communications that we have right now, we will make sure that we add this as part of that, so that folks are understanding that it's happening. Any additional discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. And we will move to public comment, and excuse us for being a bit late, but is there anyone who would like to provide public comment? Thank you.
I didn't have a handout. You take one and pass it.
Sure, thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Kathy Wick. I live at 181 Rimmon Road. I am increasingly surprised and disturbed by the amount of misinformation and disinformation that continues to be promoted in the town's housing committee. 6 months ago, Amy Morella and I presented a detailed critique of the committee's report, identifying numerous factual errors, misstatements, and misleading erroneous conclusions. In the 6 months since our critique, absolutely nothing has been done to correct any of those errors. It's important to do so in a timely fashion so that those errors are not carried forward into the upcoming revision of the town's POCD, its Plan of Conservation and Development. But the reason I'm here tonight is even more immediate and stems from my consternation after viewing the Housing Committee's February meeting. The minutes of that meeting consist primarily of the chair, Ms. Hunter, dissembling about and justifying the errors in the report, and in the process actually repeating some of those errors. Since there isn't sufficient time tonight for me to address all of my many concerns arising from the February meeting, I'll focus on just two areas. I pointed out last September that the Housing Committee report repeatedly misstates the Affordable Housing Statute, incorrectly asserting that the law contains a, quote, mandate that every town must have 10% legally affordable housing. Two of these misstatements occur on pages 12 and 45 of the report. As the chair knows, or should know, the 10% is not a mandate or a requirement. It is a threshold above which towns are exempt from the law's provisions. Only 29 of the state's 169 towns currently exceed the threshold. So Woodbridge is not an outlier. It is among the vast majority, the 140 Connecticut towns that have less than 10% legally affordable housing. Yet at the February meeting, the chair repeatedly referred to a requirement, she used that word, for 10% affordable housing, and seems to think that it is not necessary to correct this repeated error, because in one place the report actually does describe the law properly. This sloppy, inaccurate language has created the mistaken impression among many townspeople that Woodbridge is in violation of affordable housing law. This is incorrect. This same error was also promoted in this room exactly 2 weeks ago by a speaker who said she will soon be joining the Housing Committee. She referred incorrectly in her public comment to, quote, the legal obligation our town has. We provide 1.2% of our necessary 10% affordable housing, end quote. Clearly, we all should know by now that there is no such legal obligation. It is irresponsible and frankly inexcusable for these public officials to continue to spread this misinformation. I would like to suggest that our new town attorney attend a Housing Committee meeting and educate the members of the committee on the law so they will stop using this incorrect language and stop creating misimpression among the public. Another error is the chair's misrepresentation of the state's green plan. The minutes of the February meeting describe a conversation she claims to have had with Rebecca Auger from the state's Office of Responsible Growth. Ms. Hunter represented that this state official told her that towns like Woodbridge should be focusing on affordable housing rather than open space preservation. Since I was not aware of any such policy recommendation at the state level, I called the Office of Responsible Growth and spoke to Ms. Auger, the coordinator of that office, on Monday. She contradicted Ms. Hunter's characterization of state guidance and referred me to the draft of the new State Conservation and Development Plan. This new plan, which is set to take effect next year, represents a seismic shift from the old plan, with vastly increased emphasis on the importance of conservation. The new plan calls for the impact of climate change to be at the center of all planning and development decisions, and that is where this figure is in the plan. This is a brand new figure in the new plan. And as you can see, it's a Venn diagram with, this is their vision for the plan for the state over the next 5 years, 5 areas that they consider to be the most important, and at the center, relevant for each of the 5 areas, is climate change. In follow-up to our conversation, I emailed Ms. Auger to ask if my interpretation of a state's dramatic shift in emphasis in response to the climate crisis was correct, and she confirmed it for me in writing. Here's the accompanying text in the draft plan. Climate change sits at the center of the diagram, as its effects will be felt across all sectors, from opportunities to invest in innovative green industries, to balancing the need to develop more housing with the need to conserve land to protect biodiversity, and increasing public transit ridership to reduce transportation sector emissions and improve air quality. I was delighted to read this because this is exactly what I and others in the conservation community here in Woodbridge have been arguing for, a balanced approach. By stubbornly focusing on new construction on ecologically important open space land at the country club, the Housing Committee is pursuing an unbalanced approach. We believe that increasing housing opportunity and protecting more precious open space are not mutually exclusive. We can, indeed we must, do both. And that is the point of the state's new plan of conservation and development and the point of this diagram. In recognition of the catastrophic effects of climate change and the necessity of mitigating global warming, Woodbridge can and should increase housing opportunity without building on any open space lands. Due to the new zoning regulations on accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, there are literally thousands of locations in Woodbridge where affordable housing can be built in a way that benefits our current residents and does not destroy public land, since ADUs are now allowed on every residential property in town. In addition, nearly every single-family home can become a duplex. A further advantage of this approach is that it does not add market-rate homes to the town. Thus, it improves the town's ratio of affordable to market-rate housing. New construction proposals that contain only a fraction of affordable housing actually lower the overall ratio and thus move the town further away from that 10% threshold. It has been almost 2 years since the release of the Housing Committee report. In that time, what has the Housing Committee done to educate the public about these new opportunities? They've done absolutely nothing. Inexplicably, the Housing Committee has focused on new construction on open space, which is the most expensive, least sustainable, and frankly, the laziest option available to them. Here in Woodbridge, we are fortunate that we can have our cake and eat it too. Why does the Housing Committee refuse to do so?
Thank you.
Yes, hi, Amy Morella, 184 Raymond Road. I do have a copy for you, Allison, and also I have a copy of my comments from February 28th, which I will give to you, so that both of those can be in the record. I'm here to, first of all, fully agree with all of Kathy Wick's comments just offered, and to add a few comments of my own. I would say that for many months the town leadership too has only plan has been increasing affordable housing by pursuing housing development on the former Country Club of Woodbridge. As Kathy just explained, and numerous other residents have previously commented, this is a narrow-minded and lazy approach to achieving more affordable housing in town. As Kathy and I noted in our comments to the Board of Selectmen in January of this year, the most efficient and effective way to increase both the absolute and proportional availability of affordable housing is to focus on ADUs, accessory dwelling units. And forgive me, my comments are a little bit repetitive, but I think it's worth emphasizing. The sweeping new zoning regulations allow ADUs throughout town. In September 2023, as Kathy said, we urged the Housing Committee to actively promote ADUs. We appeared before this Board of Selectmen in January to make the same recommendation. As we noted then, ADUs can be built on existing lots without any need for the simultaneous construction of market-rate housing, as would happen if a real estate developer were to require a tract of undeveloped land. Thus, each ADU can increase both the absolute number of affordable housing units in town and the percentage of our housing that is deemed affordable. Any development with a mix of housing types would be less effective in increasing the percentage of affordable housing while placing more burden on town services than would happen with ADUs. Why would a Woodbridge homeowner want to build an ADU? There are many reasons. To start, ADUs facilitate aging in place. An ADU provides a place to house a professional caregiver or a relative that will be at hand to ease the burden of aging. A survey by AARP found that the vast majority of older people prefer to remain in their existing homes as they age. Half of the AARP's senior respondents were willing to look at building an ADU in order to stay in their home. And for the survey, in my written comments, I have a link to that on the website. Residents might also construct an ADU for other reasons. For example, out of a commitment to affordability or a desire for childcare support. Younger residents might welcome an ADU to house their parents or parent. And this is not in my written notes, but by the way, I'm a senior. I get the AARP magazine. They had an article not too long ago about people building ADUs for their older parents. So it works both ways. The problem here is right now, very few residents know that the town's new zoning regulations allow construction of ADUs. And Kathy noted this in January. Even a local realtor she spoke to wasn't aware that ADUs are now allowed in town. I urge you to actively promote the construction of ADUs. Clearly, the Housing Committee isn't doing so, so the Board of Selectmen needs to step up. There is an opportunity here to promote ADUs that would improve our stock of affordable housing, which Kathy and I both want. We are not against affordable housing, we are for affordable housing in the right place. And doing that through ADUs would be able to increase affordable housing stock without increasing the amount of market rate housing or disturbing undeveloped land. I also encourage you to go a step further. The Board of Selectmen should investigate the feasibility of offering property tax incentives to those property owners who construct legally affordable ADUs. For example, the property tax on the new ADU might be discounted for a period of years. Another separate comment. I encourage you to meet with Toll Brothers and encourage them to reconsider their plans for housing on the north side of Bradley Road. With an encouragement or even a possible tax incentive, they might be willing to modify their plans to incorporate affordable housing. The town should engage in this type of conversation with every private landowner that is contemplating development. And lastly, I urge you to commission a build-out analysis of the sweeping zoning changes that were adopted in 2021. The town is engaged in 3 efforts during your term of office as selectmen that would each benefit from the completion of a build-out analysis. We are trying to improve our business district. We are updating our state mandated plan of conservation and development, and we hope, addressing the future of the CCW. In order to make good decisions in each of these endeavors, we need data. A build-out analysis will tell us how many ADUs, duplexes, etc. are now allowed in town. It will offer a forecast of what our town would look like if it were fully developed in accordance with the new regulations. Once we know the potential impacts of the decisions made in 2021, we can make better decisions in 2024 and 2025. Let me offer a simple analogy. Let's say you make a substantial change in your personal finances. You start a new business, or you buy one of those really big, new, expensive boats. I wouldn't, but this is for purposes of analogy. Anyone doing so would want to know the potential impact of that action before taking another significant large financial step. You may not be able to predict everything, but you would certainly want to analyze the possibilities. A build-out analysis is very much like that. It offers that kind of information as we engage in planning for the future of our town. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else for public comment? Seeing none, Tony will return back to your report.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see, lease pricing is next. The next item on our agenda is lease pricing. So back in December of 2021, the Board of Selectmen authorized the purchase of a fire pumper for $989,116. And back in September of 2023, the Board of Selectmen approved the purchase of police radios for $291,088, both of which to be financed with lease purchase financing. And so both projects are now being completed. The radios have been delivered, and the fire pumper, I'm told, should be delivered any day now. So I went out to bid for lease financing for both projects, and the lowest bid was M&T Bank, which is a rate of 4.432%, which would be the principal payment over a 5-year period is $1,280,104, and interest in totaling $178,821 for total payments of $1,458,925. The $178,000 in interest was the low. The high bid was $355,000 in interest. So it's an example of why you go out to bid for things. And
make
so, the payments are annual payments with 5-year payments with the first payment in arrears. In arrears means essentially it's 1 year after you sign the paperwork. So it'd be in next year's budget. I forwarded the paperwork to our attorney for his review. And, the presentation.
So we're looking for,
Yeah, I've got a motion to award the bid for lease financing of a Rosenbauer fire pumper and Motorola radios to M&T Bank and sign necessary documents as reviewed by town council.
Second.
discussion. Thank you, Tony, for checking it out and getting the best rate possible.
Okay.
Sheila?
Great. I just have a quick question. So once it does hit the budget, it's gonna not be part of, is it part of capital or it's just the debt payment is gonna show
There's an interest payment each year.
in the operating budget?
We usually will fund that in the capital.
Okay,
That's what we've done historically.
so it'll show up.
It's a set, yeah, it'll show up in there. And the lease has what's called a non-appropriations clause, which means that each payment is subject to the annual appropriations process. And so should it not get approved in the budget process, then the payment is not, you make the payment and they come take the truck, essentially. I don't know if you've ever seen that before. I don't think I
It
have.
is, for example, when we
No.
were working on this year's budget, you
No,
looked at the
not really.
capital aspects of the budget, you saw it in the fire department, you saw it in the police department, that this is the same,
Correct,
so.
yeah.
mhm.
I have a question, going forward, let's say this is over 5 years, let's say year 3 or 4, we realize that there are, significant budget impacts. I have noticed that there's grant funding, even federal grant funding. Could that, if we were to apply for that 1 year for communications and for updates of police and fire, could that take over the
They
remaining?
generally, I'm not sure they would generally, you get a grant for a purchase you've already made. It's usually for a purchase you haven't made yet.
Okay.
Any other thoughts? We have the motion, we have a second, all in favor? Motion carries.
Okay.
Next item, the electricity rates.
Our electricity rates currently run through October of 2024. We bid electricity with the Amity School District and with Beecher School District. So the three of us will go out as a unit into the market. Our current rate is, as I indicated earlier, 7.9 cents per kilowatt hour. That's the generation portion is which we're bidding. So sometimes these things move kind of quickly depending on where the rates are, where the market is. We have a broker that helps us to analyze the market, and so our request is for Mika and I to have the authority or Mika particularly, to lock into electricity rates when because to come back to hear that the market's always moving, so it's sometimes not practical. Just similar to fuel, when we did fuel oil and natural gas, it's the same, sort of the same concept.
So I'll make a motion to authorize Tony Genovese and Mika Cardoza to lock in the electricity rates for the town at the time that it's appropriate.
Second.
Tony does the legwork, Tony has the experience, so obviously that's who I listen to. And
And
what
the
you're
group-
what you're giving me the authority to do is, it's time for the town.
Right. And the group will sort of make a group decision with the districts, the other two districts. The three of us will make a collective decision and when we feel it's the best time to lock in.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. CMed designation.
The last is, every year we receive a CMed designation from the state of Connecticut. CMed stands for Coordinated Medical Emergency Direction. So it's essentially coordination of our ambulances, either when there's an incident, directing to specific hospitals, and during a mass casualty, they sort of move assets around. All the towns in the COG are part of it's called MedCom, and so all of the towns will designate this funding towards that group, which helps to offset our budget. It's a pretty common thing. We do it every year.
Any thoughts? Do Do I have a motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to designate AMR as the recipient of its Regional Emergency Telecommunications Service Credit for CMed services for the fiscal year 2024-2025.
Second.
Thoughts, discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, next item on our agenda is a strategic update.
Okay.
I will turn this over to Sheila, and she'll give an update as to what we've been doing and where we are with our strategic plan,
Terrific.
and get some input.
So on behalf of the committee, which is David Vogel and I, and we typically meet with Tony Genovese, and Mika joined us for all of our meetings. We met several times since the last Board of Selectmen meeting, just to take a look at the document that was turned over to us from the previous Board of Selectmen and make adjustments. So there were several things we found that have been accomplished, so they don't need to remain on the strategic plan. But we did want to keep the same general structure, just as a draft to present to this Board of Selectmen, because of course we need your input before we would finalize. I would envision that after we have some discussion here tonight, that at our next meeting of the Strategic Plan Committee, we would assimilate all those thoughts, make any adjustments, and be prepared to bring to you at the April meeting a final version of this that we might then vote to adopt, if it pleases the board, and then disseminate to the public, especially at the public budget hearing and the annual town meeting. That's when this was originally kind of presented to the public as just something to give them a sense of what the Board of Selectmen is intending to do in the short term. We obviously have those long-term planning documents, such as the Plan of Conservation and Development, that guide us over 10 years, but we found with the last Board of Selectmen that it was helpful to try to really think on a 2-year term. So we're already almost 1 quarter into the 8 quarters of our term that we're elected for. So we were looking from that lens to try to clarify and communicate to the public what we were intending to do and what we were expected to be able to complete. That said, it's a living document. As we go through it, from month to month, we can make changes to it as the board would like to see. But I think if we can if we can aim to have a version of this out in time for the annual town meeting, so everyone could perhaps comment there and give us feedback, and we could continue to adjust. So with that said, you'll see I shared in the packet just draft notes of where we are. I'm particularly interested to know, especially from the new members, if there are big ideas that you do not see incorporated in this document, and if that's the case, we should talk about where they might fit, and then the Strategic Plan Committee could go back and do some more of that small bore thinking to capture it. We've got the same big goals in mind: ensure financial stability, and then there are sub-pieces to that, strategies and tactics. And then the next section is maintaining and investing in the infrastructure and facilities. Obviously, because we've already been through the budget process and we've looked at that capital budget request going out 6 years, we're aware that there are lots of moving pieces with big dollar amounts attached to them. So this is the section, from what I can tell, I think this is the section of the plan that we should do the most work trying to flesh out and give people a realistic understanding of what's going to happen when. Right now, you'll see it's got a lot of placeholders. I think we need to better understand things like the center building project and the various phases of several things. This plan maintains, I think, the exact same language we had for the Country Club of Woodbridge future use. We're still in that process. I think maybe there's little tweaks to some of that language, but as this board develops the plan a little bit more, I think we can fine-tune that language as well. I did hear tonight from our superintendent a reminder yet again that there is another project that's on the horizon. It's the next portion of the roof that will need to be done after the current portion this summer is done. So I took a little note, going to add that in. I, from memory, can tell you, I think it was 2004 that we did the south roof and
Yep.
rotunda.
That's right, yeah.
So 20 years is 2024. So we will, within the next few years, need to figure out how to fund that, which means that in our 2-year term, we're gonna have to at least have it on the radar that there's another bond out there for that. I'm also particularly interested when it comes to Beecher, understanding a little bit more. I know Vonda mentioned the RFQ that's out there already, and so how that fits into either what we've got listed here, or maybe it's a separate thing. So that's the different building projects. Keen to hear your thoughts on that. And then the last area, goal area, is enhancing quality of life, and that one has shrunk and tightened up a little bit. I think we'll fine tune it a little bit more. But with that, do you have any other things you'd like to talk about, David, here?
I think Sheila's done a great bit of work on this for a couple of years now. And I think the thing that we need to do as a board, which perhaps we didn't quite achieve in the first iteration, it was new, is really kind of digest all this information and make it a changeable document. We need to get more public input. We need to also probably get some timelines on here that'll fit with Mika's plan for running these meetings. Also, I would think that we need to kind of get it out as this is the way we would like to work with our boards and commissions, particularly, so that it becomes a document that we feel like helps us plan. Clearly, we do a better job of these things when we have a more holistic approach to the town. This is a piece of that. I think Tony brought the concept because it's important for the work of the financial department to have something there that
It's helpful for us to know what your priorities are and what your plan is, so if we see opportunities, you know, we know what to look for.
and particularly has helped when we've been seeking out grants. Because a grant that comes across somebody's awareness that it doesn't fit in with anything we're planning doesn't help us for them to spend time on it as much as it would if it's right up in the wheelhouse. So I think this document can become more important for us if everybody really, you know, internalizes it, pays attention to it, feeds in where you think the changes should be. That's pretty much it.
And you touched on it, David, but Mika, you had discussed a little bit about how you see this integrating into our meetings. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Rather than it being a document that we kind of keep separate, I'd like to incorporate, when we develop our agenda, I'd like it to be very specific to some of the goals here to make sure there are the items that are in there, we consider how does that play into what we're trying to achieve from a strategic standpoint. So actually to label some of the agenda items as in terms of what goal, what tactic we're looking to achieve there. That way it's always front of mind for us. It's always something that we're looking to make sure we're making progress on. And as David and Sheila both said, as David indicated, it's a living document. It's not something that's, okay, check that off and on to the next one. We may want to adjust, and we need to do that. So it's one that it really needs, from a Board of Selectmen standpoint, it's something that we each need to individually constantly consider and identify and revise. What's our priority? Because a priority that we have from a strategic standpoint that we want to complete by the end of the year could take place. We might want to push that up because there's some things going on in the town that really require that we make it a more urgent type of a priority. So I think it's something that I want to see us use regularly and become a part of what we do on on a routine basis.
As a corollary to that, would we also have the intention of using the documents and the goals and the tactics also to help inform the charge of our various committees in town and what they're working towards as well, so that there's a holistic view looking over the various committees and a way that they can work together, and also individualized goals that are tied to the strategic plan as well.
Absolutely.
So that they're informing this as well, and that can be tied into their,
It actually gives us something we can go to the commissions with and say, okay, this seems to pertain to you, this is something this is what we have on our plan for our town. We expect that, this is what our expectation is. In addition to your normal, in addition to your charge, we understand that you do, item, or your objective is A, but understand how that corresponds in terms of the benefits to the town and the value and the priority for the town. But yes, we specifically discussed how this gives us an opportunity to better communicate with the commissions in terms of what their focus should be.
and then everyone knows what overall goal they're working towards as well, from
Correct.
a priority standpoint.
The other thing that we talked a little bit about in the strategic planning committee meeting was the plan of conservation development itself. If you look in the back of the existing plan, there's a whole table of action items, and they're assigned to various boards and commissions, those same boards and commissions that had input into the plan. So as part of a continuous planning process, it might be helpful, and I've already sort of taken a look at the various aspects of the 10-year plan to see how they align to this 2-year plan, so that we can perhaps have some conversations about what we're expecting, hopefully, to see in the next POCD, and make sure that our document is aligning and we're supplying the input at the same time. So that's in the same process there. There are some things that we've already made great progress on. There are some things that either might be reconsidered by this board as, maybe this is a different direction we should go. Or we might have to accelerate. There might be things that have come up on the radar that didn't exist 10 years ago. So that's the framework. But has anyone thought of anything that's not here? Yeah.
Well, I think this is really well inclusive, but I do wonder, and maybe this is more of a bigger picture, less of a BOS time frame, but in resilience, climate resilience, adaptability, investing in infrastructure, green and otherwise, to promote a resilient and healthy future for us. That can be lumped into the quality of life. It could really fit into any of these goals,
Yeah.
broad strokes.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be silly for us in 2024 to not incorporate some, and prioritize opportunities for us to invest in climate smart practices.
Right. So strategy 7, which I think moved from a different section into the
Goal 2 strategy.
Focus on, okay.
Sorry, yeah,
Okay.
Goal 2. And we put it in Goal 2 because we thought exactly along the lines of what you're saying. These are investments, just like we invest in the physical infrastructure. Things like what we're saying, green energy plan, right? This was something that Mika, really brought to the forefront to say, we're sort of recharging the sustainability committee, but there's a lot of other moving pieces here, including things like, what are we doing with our town building projects?
Right. And what are we doing with our tree care and planting? I mean, it goes beyond green energy. Sustainability goes, and I don't mean to belittle these inclusions. Composting, recycling, green energy are critical. Mm-hmm. But we also need to think differently about our approach to the impacts of climate change and mitigating that at a more localized level, like like flooding, impacts of flooding,
Yes.
and mitigating those impacts.
So the all hazards plan that we have for the town, that's maybe we can specifically incorporate something to do with that.
And Andrea, I
If
think
it
that's
seems feasible, I'm new to this, so.
Well, I think that's the value you bring, is that experience. So I think it's important that we hear, we understand, because there are items you mentioned that I just don't think of. Do I think it's a beautiful thing? Absolutely. But do I think, is that top of mind for me? Not necessarily. I'm thinking, more along, like you said, clean energy and things of that nature.
Which
So-
is important.
Right, so along those lines, that's exactly the input that we're looking for. What do we incorporate? Where do we incorporate it? How do we make it? What I don't wanna have is just a list of wonderful things that we can do.
Understood.
That we're not able to get accomplished, right, we can't afford, we can't do, whatever. what we really are looking for is make sure if there's a goal we have, that we have tactics that will get us to that goal that we can work toward.
Well, a thought that inspired this
Not to say anything you
contribution,
said was that.
no, was the fact that either Dave or Sheila framed this as, if it's integrated here, it could help us apply for grants.
Right.
And right now, there's so much money coming,
Yeah.
currently available, and coming over the next few years for private and public landowners to make some of these investments and decisions. So, if, we can come up with a way to make it, at the very least, achievable for us to apply for those funding opportunities.
Yeah.
Even if that's just the tactic.
Well, and I think another thing that it's kind of sparking, hearing what you're saying, things like existing plans and documents that already exist, maybe if it's helpful, if we were to hyperlink them throughout this document, so that
That would be helpful.
we could all take a look, and then, because we don't want people reinventing wheels that are already, in
Right.
existence. We gotta dust them off, get them out of the closet, dust them off, and start rolling with them, because some of these things exist, and they just need quick updates.
Yeah.
So,
and-
I know with the Sustainable CT program, that when we applied that time, that was a process of combing through and finding all these existing policies and documents, so.
Please provide the input, simple email, couple
Okay.
of bullet points.
Yep.
you
I
know.
actually wanted to see if we could have a folder in that SharePoint.
Yes.
That would also allow the public to see what we're working on as well, if that's allowable.
So within our network, I'm working on ways to, yes, we can create a SharePoint site that is just dedicated to the strategic plan that we could share with the public. I just have to get a couple answers from my on permissions that would be to anyone with an email address, but yes, we could actually
Great.
look into that.
That way, if I'm linking documents, there's a hard copy, well, not a hard copy, but an electronic copy of the document we're linking.
Why not use our website for that?
I don't know that some of these things are on our website.
But I'm saying, why not put it on, if I was gonna look for this type of information, I would go to our website, as opposed to
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely
identifying a
have an
separate.
interface for that.
Yeah.
You could have a link into the SharePoint too.
Yeah, no, that's-
I
yeah.
think that's what they have for
Okay.
conservation.
That's what I would
But
look
they're
for.
probably
I'm
using
just thinking
Office.
myself, if I was looking for something along these lines, I would go to our website, and like
Yeah.
you said, maybe we
Yeah.
put it on the
On the
SharePoint.
side of the Board of
but-
Selectmen there, you have tabs we've been building, we could make one that's just for the,
Yeah.
Yeah.
strategic plan committee, yeah.
And then the PDFs could be on the SharePoint and linked from the website.
I'd like to have this completed by our May date, so,
By
Yeah.
which date?
May.
by May,
By May,
by our
yeah.
May meeting.
Okay.
So it's something that
Yeah.
the input needs to come in, and so we can continue to work on it and finish it, and make it a document that we all feel really good about.
Yeah, one of the things I'm kind of experimenting with is some kind of graphic that shows the quarters, and believe it or not, our April meeting is day 100 of our terms. So we'll be
Goes quickly.
one
huh?
quarter in already, so
Yeah.
it really does help, I think, to get a sense, put it on a timeline and see where we are. And that will keep us back at the Board of Selectmen.
That's a great approach.
Steve, did you have something you wanted?
Yeah, well, I want to say thank you so much for your work on this. I'm really impressed by what we've got, and so thank you and David for working on this. And I concur with Andrea on sort of highlighting. I think there's a lot of the sustainability and green issues are within this, and I think making adjustments to highlight that and sort of name climate change in there and mitigation and adaptation strategies as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that stood out to me, or sort of as a question, whether to include, is charter reform.
Yeah.
So is that something that should be in this, in terms of the strategic plan? And I'd sort of
Yeah.
be curious from our new
glad you
council
brought that
as to, is that required in this,
Yeah.
at a date,
Yeah.
and where that falls?
And if we're going to incorporate it here, how do we plan for the amount of time it will take? So
Mike, we
that is a
talked
question.
about this. The charter was something that very specifically came up as far as one of our goals is concerned. My sense is that that's a second-year goal, if you will. I don't see us considering the other things that we have on our plate right now. I don't see it as being our first-year goal. And that's a very specific task, if you will. That's more, it's a long one, it's a hard one, it's it could be a very much involved one, but it's not like improving the grant list, in terms of being something that you really need to work more toward gradually. This is something that, once we get it started, there are generally particular tasks and methodology that you go by it. my sense was that's something we add in 6 months to 9 months, saying that this is what we're gonna do for the next year, rather than putting it in here, but we can. It's just, to me, I want this document to be something, when you look at it, we can figure in June we're gonna do this, in September we're gonna do this. This is so we have a better sense of that type of thing. So that's up to the group. That's really up to the group.
Yeah.
I think having it on there and being transparent about the timeline of it is helpful, because it's
Works.
still guiding, but it lets people know that this is on the radar, this realistically is
Yep.
where we think we're gonna get to this at this point.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Good
So
input.
And if the process includes taking it to some kind of townwide vote, obviously we have to back our way into when we want
Right,
that to take
sure.
place. So even if we want that to happen within our 2-year term, we may find when we back in, we gotta start tomorrow.
If, and I think there is also some legislation that's being
Yeah.
considered right now that may afford towns different types of latitudes that weren't there before as far as charter revisions are concerned.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that I felt, kind of let's see how that plays out and see, see what timeframes and what we can do from that perspective. But yes, I think you're right, Maria, there's no reason not to put it on with the timeframe.
Right, well, that
So-
could be one of the tactics that we list under it as well, that we are, awaiting, state legislative updates on the process, et cetera, because that, lets people know what's on our radar and what we're looking for as well.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
yeah. Is that something that, you guys
Yeah, I'm
want?
just gonna add, you need probably a good year, at least, from beginning to end. It's a very regulated process by statute. And it starts with the appointment of the Charter Revision Commission. They have to hold certain hearings. Eventually, they make a report to the Board of Selectmen. And there is a municipal vote, usually tied to an election in November. Beginning to end, I think you need a good year. So you could start it now, and you won't have enough time, I don't think, for this November, nor do you apparently want to do it that quickly, but if you want to do it within this 2-year period, you probably should plan on, the beginning of next year,
Right.
at the latest. Maybe
Right.
start thinking about it this fall. or winter.
Would you say there's gonna be legal costs associated with that we would need to budget for? Is that something that would be incorporated? Don't mean to put you on the spot here, but,
In terms of legal costs or
yeah,
other costs?
to do charter revision. Now, we haven't done it in many years.
Well, very often we take it depends really. Sometimes we've taken a very active role. I've attended, every charter commission meeting in some towns. That's not always necessary, but that was what that town desired. There are legal costs involved. And other than that, it's tied into a municipal election or a national election. Sometimes that's a decision to be made. What election do you want to tie it into so you get maximum participation? It's not a huge. There are some costs, but it's not huge.
Okay.
But one of the reasons Bertram Moses is with us is because of your experience with doing charter revisions. So
We've done quite a few.
Yeah.
So maybe
So
we
it
can.
is something we,
And there's no,
put a lot of-
sorry, Sheila.
Sure.
There's no requirement that you do it. Some towns haven't done it in, years, maybe decades, forever.
Yeah, it's been 20
It
years.
really depends on, whether you're satisfied or not, or is there a growing concern that certain basic changes have to be made.
From my
We'll probably pick up on that. in a
From my
few
perspective,
months.
Ira, I see when we look at the charter, as a result of changing the date of our election, there's language in the charter that no longer applies.
Yeah.
And
Some
so
of that's
there's-
technical,
From an
though.
administrative, that's technical administrative, so deciding whether, okay, do we change, by next November, we need to change that. So now it's a matter of, how does that, not this November, but rather
Yeah.
25.
Sometimes it's a series of, updates, technical things, changing names or things like that. And sometimes it's more fundamental, you change your system of government in some
Right.
respects or something like that. So kind of depends on how you feel it's working.
Right, so perhaps at a upcoming strategic planning committee, we can have a little bit more focus on this, so we can get a sense of where we might put it in our plan, just for the sake of planning, and then come back to the full board.
To make sure we have a viable timeline to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll also start reviewing some of the things that we'll be looking at.
I have a question about, under the goal of financial stability, looking at some of the tactics that are under there. So in, I think it's the third strategy, 3, exploring shared services, and engaging with the state representatives in discussion of state support for expansion of shared services. So in the ad hoc committee that the Board of Ed had last summer, I know when we did look at when the new Region 20 that's coming up, the combined regionalization of those towns and and Region 6 to form that new region. And I don't know if, I haven't read the law thoroughly enough to know if the state has changed it for the next fiscal year, but there was a higher rate of reimbursement for projects that needed to be done that involved the combining of services and combining of regionalization. So
Right.
there are potentially, from a finance standpoint, there are some more funds that we can tap into with the state if there are projects that are done in combination. And perhaps we should also look at that for even the first strategy under there when we're already working with Peary, but also with the Army Corps of Engineers looking at the flooding around West River. I did see that there were some endorsements for this year for other towns to engage with the Army Corps of Engineers for various projects. So maybe that's something, if there is another project that we identify, that's something that we can talk to our representatives about putting an endorsement either into the federal bill or into one of the state bills for funding.
Right, and I think that so we do have several building committees that are currently functioning, and I think that as far as the Board of Selectmen's role in trying to identify pieces or phases of projects that can stand alone and have their documentation and their planning ready to go. So it's a shovel-ready type of project, because that's been our experience. The town of Woodbridge has experienced, when you have a plan ready, when a funding opportunity comes up, that's when you can apply. And until you have that plan ready, you just have pieces of paper. So what we're thinking of is how do we make sure that we're guiding the building committees? So, for example, the center building and the phasing, if there's potential for Homeland Security grants for police stations, but our project is police and, if we could isolate the police part so that it's ready to go into that funding stream for consideration, we're just one step ahead. So this is where we're working with Tony and his guidance on, we'll have documents ready as a town to take advantage when his staff finds all kinds of opportunities for us. But it helps if we'll organize it a little bit more. So I think that's.
So again, Maria, please
That's a good point.
submit that information, some of what you just described. Please send it to us so that we can make sure
And we'll
we
link it
incorporate
on the shared drive.
Yeah. And when we're talking about shared services, we're talking about with the Amity District or with the BOA District or both, exploring all of those options? Is that from an administrative point of view, shared space point of view, or all of the above that we're exploring?
Yeah, so a lot of this came from that CERC report that I think is referenced somewhere along the line.
I think it's linked at the top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a section there, and they did an initial analysis of some of the potential opportunities. And they're the ones who actually came back and said, well, if the state were to incentivize, so let's say legal fees need to be expended in order to figure out how you might combine contracts with labor, individual units of labor, that's a one-time fee, and if the state were to put money against that sort of thing for people to apply to, different towns could apply, that might be something. So those are some of the things that I think, again, if we link out to maybe even specific pages in different reports, and if the ad hoc enrollment committee has documents online at the Beecher site, we'll link over there.
Okay.
That way we can, when we get to these in the strategic planning meetings, we can sort of deep dive into the documents and come back out again. Okay.
I'm going to hold up some discussion only because it is 7 o'clock, and I would like to open the public hearing portion of this, and once that's completed, we can come back and we can continue discussion. Okay? So, in moving to our public hearing, in accordance with in accordance with Chapter 197-3B of Town of Woodbridge Code, I now call this public hearing to order to receive comments on the proposed updates to the rules and regulations for the Northwest Cemetery. Legal notice was published in the New Haven Register on March 2nd, 2024. Is there a motion to waive the reading of the legal notice?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? The purpose of the hearing is to receive public comment on the proposed updates to the Northwest Cemetery. In accordance with Chapter 197-3 of the town's code, the Board of Selectmen will establish rules and regulations for the Northwest Cemetery, and those rules and regulations will become effective following the public hearing. Are there any comments from the public present with regard to this?
Mika, I just had one comment, but not as a member
Please.
of the public. The only thing that I noted was the spelling of the property, and I think the original, maybe 1982 Coupop report, which talked about this, actually there was a recommendation back in 1982 to make sure we're spelling it correctly, and I think their recommendation, someone needs to check, I think it's one word, Northwest. And we have it,
2 words.
right.
Okay.
So
Northwest
if we
is in
can,
the
if
notes,
that's
it's
just a
Northwest.
technical change that can be made after the hearing closes, I don't know if that's, is that technical?
that's substantive, so
Yeah.
that's okay.
Sounds technical.
Okay, we'll make that adjustment. Any public comment? Seeing none, I now declare this public hearing closed.
I can make a motion.
Please.
So I'll make a motion to, to approve the proposed updates to the rules and regulations of Northwest Cemetery pursuant to Chapter 197-3A, effective immediately.
Okay, with the update of the wording, right?
Yeah, and in my, yes, I have it written, my motion as one word.
Oh, good. Well, let's check first, let's check, but then if that's the case, then throughout, yeah.
And we will make sure that that's adjusted.
I guess I better second it. I'm the oldest guy here, so. Probably closest to that.
Got a spot picked out yet?
Is there any discussion, any comments? Hearing none, I'll take a vote. All in favor? Motion is carried. And we will now return back. Andrea, you had something you were gonna say.
I
about
did,
strategic
Mika,
plan.
how'd you know? A question maybe more than a comment. So for goal 1, tactic B, this seems important and kind of multifaceted. So I'm wondering if the inclusion of some of these, like business district, workforce housing goals, would this incorporate some of the feedback we've been getting from the public over the past few months about the need to assess maybe more holistically our current zone, the impact of our updated zoning regulations, and you know, better understand our potential for ADU development? Is that included in this? Can that be included in our strategic plan? Is it something?
I think
Yeah.
we're,
So I could definitely tell you that if you could see the red line of how things moved around here. So this is just, this one tactic B under goal 1, strategy 1, has incorporated pieces from other parts that were kind of orphaned when we made changes. So we have them together here, and the idea was this is the initial exploration that we start with receiving recommendations and discussing them as a
Okay.
group. So Mika, does that conform with your vision for how we would go about tackling some of these?
oh, it does. Obviously, we want to incorporate as much as possible. We had spoken specifically about ADU, and I'm wondering, as we think about it, if there's a communication portion of this that needs to be somewhere that we can,
Yeah, so we had under transparency and enhanced communication.
Right.
So I think we can include a little bit more there. So continue public information efforts to inform the public about could have more things in it,
Okay.
right?
You
So
know.
things like we have been hearing the options that homeowners and property owners might have and not know they have. So I think it works there. And then I would say also, Mika mentioned at the start of the meeting, the idea of revitalizing that town magazine that comes out, which would most likely focus a lot on the business district. That sort of fits in. So there's communications kind of throughout everything, but in terms of like transparency and enhanced communication, maybe we can call that out a little bit more.
And also, we may wanna look at, I mean, the ADU opportunity is significant, and we may wanna look at housing from that perspective, and really incorporate that in here in terms of all the different options that may help us in terms of achieving what we're looking for. Personally, I feel that we do need to do something to, in addition to ADU or complementary to ADU, as relates to allowing seniors to age in place and/or downsize and be able to stay in town. Aging in place is the ideal, that's the, top priority, but at the same token, if that's not something that's either available to them or that they are looking for, it would be great to at least enable them to be able to have a place in town that they could also opt for.
Yeah,
So-
it occurs to me a while back, we had something about granny pods, like a regulation, right?
Right.
And we prohibited them in our ordinance.
I was thinking of something different than granny pod, but,
Well, the idea is it's a free prab building that
Right.
goes on your property and, you put your granny in it.
but
Such an
that might qualify as an ADU now. Because depending on the square footage, it could be separated from the
Yeah,
house.
so I think
So-
maybe a review of that regulation, because it might be,
In conflict.
yeah.
So that's something that we
More
can take a
legal
look at.
things to talk
And I
about.
think the communication piece of that is very important, and it's something that, communication generally speaking of our priorities, is something that we should make sure is, we're working toward.
Yeah.
I appreciate that inclusion. So it sounds like kind of both a communication piece and an internal
Recommendations.
data-driven kind of analysis.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna put that into the recommendation, so including data to analyze, yeah,
I like that.
Thank
Love
you.
data.
recommendations.
Any other thoughts on this? Again, we'll be working on it. We'll, at different sessions, we'll send information out on a regular basis so you know what's happening and what progress is being made. But your input is always requested and looked for. All right, any other thoughts on this? We will move on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good-
you.
good- Nicely
Thank you very
done.
much, Sheila. Thank you very much, Sheila. Our next item is a COOPOP recommendation for Brookwood Drive. I'm hopeful you all had an opportunity to review their recommendation. Generally, in summary, it's basically saying that we have 3 properties, there's approximately 5+ acres there, and COOPOP has concluded that there's really nothing, much of it is wetlands, there's really not much that can be done with it, so their feeling is that the regulations that exist and everything that stands to it, there's no point in doing anything more with it, because the regulations basically dictate that we leave it as it is.
The inland wetlands.
Correct. Regs, exactly. So, from my perspective, I thought, and just so you know what drove having this included, was because COOPOP is charged with evaluating or looking at publicly owned properties. In this case, this is what was concluded. As we look at other properties, I want to make sure that you folks in the public are made aware of what we're looking at. We bring it here and we discuss it. We have some dialogue in regard to understanding what the potentials are for it, and we decide on what we want to do with it. So this is the first one. There's really not much to it. There was discussion about not putting it on the agenda, but I thought, let's get used to it. Let's have it on there so everyone knows that this is the type of thing we're going to be going forward and doing. We would like to look at options for different properties in terms of what we can do.
Can I ask a quick question? So I really appreciate the depth of the, what's documented here, so talk about data, right? But what I'm wondering is if anyone had looked at, so my understanding is when there's a proposal for a development, housing development in town, and this one dates back to the 90s, I guess. They're looking at the zoning reg. TPZ obviously has regulations, and I think there's a regulation in there that says with a certain number of acres, we're looking for open space set-asides within that. That's certainly something that they discussed with 1014 Merritt. And I'm wondering, I thought it would be very helpful to understand, I don't know if the regulation changed since that time, if it's always been that same regulation that says TPZ is to set aside some property, if that's the case. So I would, I think, gain a little bit further understanding of how it is that we have so many of these set-asides within developed areas in town. So a big housing plan comes in, puts in a road, and there's a couple of lots. If those lots are then given to the town as part of the TPZ approval process, because of the regulations that TPZ was applying, then we maybe don't even need to reconsider them, because then we'd be undermining our own regulations. And I don't know if the attorneys, again, sorry to keep referencing you guys, but you might say to us, maybe you don't want to do that. Is that something that the Board of Selectmen should understand if we're looking at properties that are publicly owned? How did they become owned by us? And if it was through TPZ regulations, we're not going to change the use, are we? Or are we, do we have leeway to do that?
I guess it's part of a regulation, if it's a set-aside, so it would be the TP&Z to make that call, I guess, but that was a policy decision, I'm assuming. I would think what you're doing are different from the set-aside part of a zoning approval. It strikes me as two different things.
Right.
Could be wrong, but
Yeah.
that's what it
So
sounds
maybe
like.
if we were to just do a little research to find out if that's what this is, and I don't know that it is, but I know that this was I think that these two pieces that are in front of us, or is it three?
I think it's worth doing on going forward. I don't know that we would do it on this since it's already been concluded that there's nothing gonna happen to it, so.
Yeah, maybe
why-
the next one instead.
Maybe the next one, we
Yep.
just ask them if they would, consider that, make sure that that's
Yeah.
something that they mention in their analysis so that we know that
Yeah.
it's been considered.
Yeah, and
But
it's
yeah.
probably something in the minutes of the TPZ, which legally have to still exist, so I'm sure they're there somewhere.
So, understood.
Mika, I just had a clarifying question to ask about the deed transfer history. So, in 1955, apparently it was in the hands of Sidney and Phyllis Horton, or set forth in a warranty deed who deeded it saying it should be solely used for residential purposes. And then, am I assuming it was by different owners, or maybe not, but it was transferred to the town of Woodbridge in 1990 with no additional information, and there was no additional information regarding the transaction. So when Woodbridge received it in 90, was that 55 restriction known? So that supersedes whatever transpired in 1990.
I think it carries with the land record.
I would imagine so. I don't know if that's always the case, though.
Yeah.
But-
Yeah, the
oh.
restriction for 55 doesn't just
Go away.
disappear now, it
Okay.
carries forward, yeah.
So, just a related question, it also says that you can't run a business. No building will be erected thereon shall be used for mercantile, manufacturing, or business purposes. Is that still the case for everything that is related to this deed, this original deed that's running with the land records?
Presumably, I mean, unless it's been leased somehow by the people who benefit from it at some point over time, but otherwise it runs with the wind.
Okay.
Are you saying like if someone had a business that they ran from their home, but
Yeah, I
not
don't know if they know
necessarily
about
a
it.
commercial business where people would come to the property?
Yeah, so what happens typically in Woodbridge is if you're gonna run a home-based business, you have to come to TPZ and get permission to do that. You're supposed to register the use of your property as a home-based business, and at that point, they would probably look at this. As long as people know they have to register their business, so just PSA to folks out there.
Even if it's not a commercial business and people aren't coming to
Well, this
like
is
it's
the
a,
old-fashioned terminology here, mercantile, manufacturing, or
Did you say
business.
something about erecting? I'm
Was
sorry,
that-
when you read it, you read something about erecting a,
Yeah, said lot shall be used solely and wholly for residential purposes, and no building erected thereon shall be used for mercantile, manufacturing, or business purposes, and no structure shall be erected, altered, placed, or permitted to remain on the above described lot other than single-family dwelling. That was the
Right.
piece that was referenced.
I think that's one of those things that you have to kind of, could be a gray area only in the sense of home businesses at the time that that was done were not necessarily something that was being considered. But anyway, we can,
I mean,
Yeah.
we'd have to look into it, but
Right.
I would think
Right.
a home business like, a doctor or an accountant or something is not what the intent of the old language that you're citing, but we'd have to spend a little bit of time, I think, to look at it, but I think that would again be something different than what was intended by that restriction.
I agree. Okay. And as I say, since this one really not doing anything with, there's really no point in delving into that, but obviously making sure that we cover that if, in understanding that. David?
Yeah, this is just pedantic nitpicking, so, but, I don't know, we're not the author of this document, but I guess it will go into the public record, this report to us from Coupop?
It will, yes.
Could we ask them to just clear up a couple of typo things so that it doesn't go in?
Absolutely.
Ownership of the properties, right after the description of the 3 properties, I believe that should be quit claim deed, which is a single word, not whatever quit claim is, which isn't anything.
You're right.
The other thing that I would like, I believe that what they meant to say about in the following, in the second page, when they were talking about the chairs of the commissions that they sent this to, I think they meant that the chair of conservation is ex officio member of Coupop, not ad hoc.
I noticed that as well, yes, you're right.
And the same way with Bob Clay on the chair of TPZ. So those were the 2 things that sort of stuck out to me that I wouldn't want to see in the public record. Or would like it corrected if we could get it.
Would you make a note of that, Allison, just so we make sure? Yep. Thank you.
Mika, thanks for bringing this to the board's attention, putting it on the agenda.
You're welcome. For future reference, let's try to, if you see typos, let's change them before we get to the meetings.
I should have done that, but it
Yeah.
wasn't ours, so I didn't know
Yeah.
who, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. No, I'm saying, now I'm letting everyone know we can do that.
Okay.
And we'll
Okay.
get back to the chair. If you see a typo,
Take
we'll
it
get
back.
back to the chair.
I didn't
We'll-
see it until too late to do that.
And no problem. I appreciate you bringing it up at all, so.
I think I read that today, this piece.
All right.
I did go by and look at the property though, and it's like a marsh.
Well, now especially.
Yeah.
My
But
yard's like
but it's
this.
always been like that, so.
Yeah, no, it is. I
think
agree with you.
The recommendation is appropriate.
Sound. All right, next item on the agenda is a housing update. And we do have the chair of the housing committee, Kathy Hunter, who.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for this opportunity to report on the work of the Housing Committee. Before I start, I would like to recognize a couple of our Housing Committee members. We have Mary Bean and Elaine Feldman here. So
Thank
they
you,
might
thank
be-
you for joining us.
They might be helping us field some questions. So what I plan to do is really briefly review the Housing Committee's report that was submitted back in September 2023, because we never really had a chance to talk about that report, and then talk about our current efforts, and then I'd like to address some comments that were made by a couple of residents. So as a way of background, we were originally known as the Woodbridge Housing Opportunity Study Committee, and we had a charge to deliver an affordable housing plan to the town on or before June 1st, 2022, which we did. And I have to say that we are proud of the report that was submitted. It took a lot of hard work. It really did. It was facilitated by a professional planning firm that was hired by the South Central Regional Council of Government, RKG. They are a very highly reputable firm in the planning sector world. You know, this plan has been reviewed by Connecticut housing and planning experts who confer that it's a good plan for Woodbridge in advancing affordable housing goals. And I really hope that everybody has had the opportunity to you know, read the plan or look at the plan. I'm really happy that it does sit prominently on the Board of Selectmen's website, so people could access it. I know it's long, and you know, have heard concerns that it's long, but we really wanted to be transparent, and we wanted to include all the information that helped formulate that plan. So you had surveys, the SCROG surveys, you had our local surveys, you had our existing conditions and uses, and we had all the information that went into the plan. But if you're looking for a, a shorter read, then I would suggest that you look at the housing goals and look at our strategies. So after we submitted the plan, in September 2022, the Housing Committee was established by the Board of Selectmen, and they charged us with exploring, initiating, and developing advice to the Board of Selectmen about ways to create a more diverse, inclusive community with housing opportunities for people at all levels of income and stages of life. So we, as a committee, we take our charge seriously. We have an extreme housing crisis in the state, and we must acknowledge the severity of this. Housing is becoming the state's #1 priority. We have current residents that are extremely house burdened and are a paycheck away from losing their housing. We have a growing homelessness population that is directly linked to affordable housing shortage, and that is now estimated to be 169,000 units. To move forward, we must acknowledge that Woodbridge has a shortage of safe, affordable housing now available to low and moderate income households. And there's always like the question, what is affordable housing? Quite simply, housing is housing that costs you no more than 30% of your income. And this is based on the reasoning that for most households, especially those in the lower half of the income spectrum, the remaining 70% has to be used to pay for things like food and clothing and transportation and health care. In Woodbridge, 63% of renters and 29% of homeowners are considered burdened by housing costs. And burden means that they're paying far in excess of 30% of their income. And just for illustration, in terms of numbers of what affordable housing looks like, if we want to count a unit towards the state affordable housing count, we would start with the median family income, and we're using the state median income when we're talking about counting towards the affordable housing appeals list. So that is and I'm rounding here just to make the math easier. It is $120,000. That's the state median income for a family of 4. So at 80%, that would be $96,000. So if you times, take 30% of that and you divide it by 12, that's a monthly. They would need $2,400 to pay for rent or pay for a mortgage. That is the amount that's the limit in terms of what they would be paying. If we're looking at 60%, then that would be $1,800. A single person at 80% would be $66,250. So these are our salaries that would include educators, healthcare workers, public servants that serve our town, and we lack housing for these households. And so we've been working on strategies to how do we create that housing. So to review our, I'm going to go through our first year activities that was in the September plan update. We first looked at priority setting, the strategies that were in our plan. And the priorities that we had in there in terms of our strategies that we laid out in our plan, we included resident education program. And the aim there was to promote awareness and understanding of affordable housing to reduce the pushback we get from residents towards housing development. Reviewing existing zoning to reduce the barriers to affordable housing development. Hosting developer roundtables to encourage affordable housing. Amending the plan of conservation to align with the affordable housing plan. And we're actually going to be doing that now that you approved SLR to do the plan of conservation and development. Revising our inclusionary zoning that we have, so it actually works. Creating incentive housing zones. This would allow for increased density beyond what the base zoning is in that district. Encouraging middle options, and that's like reviewing zoning districts and look to building like 3 to 4 unit buildings or 3 to 10 unit buildings. Disposition of town-owned land for housing production. In the home ownership side, implementing first-time homebuyer program. Of course, that would be predicated on developing affordable housing opportunities, which we don't have. But if we could do that, then we could also implement first-time homebuyer program. Creating a standalone accessibility assistance program to help folks that need to install permanent accessibility improvements in their home. And creating programs for homeowner rehab that offers forgivable gap financing for homeowner rehab for those low-income households in our community. The other activity that we did was just learning, just trying to get information and learning opportunities to become more informed of how we could promote our affordable housing plan. So we did invite a Woodbridge resident who happens to work with a local nonprofit that develops affordable housing, and he discussed, housing developments that he was working on in Guilford and Hampden and Cheshire, and included a 100-unit development in Guilford that will be on septic. So that is a possibility. We invited Sean Gio, who's the policy director of the Partnership for Strong Communities, and he's probably the premier housing expert in the state, to talk about recommendations as to how Woodbridge can increase affordable housing. And he provided several strategies, talked about making it easier for housing to be built, lowering the regulatory barriers. This provides, the town the power of deciding where affordable housing could be built, and some technical assistance that could help us with this. We could contact LISC or community development finance institutions to help us, figure this out. Establishing an affordable housing fund, and that could be funded through town appropriations, fees from permits, opt-out fees for inclusionary zoning if we decide to have our inclusionary zoning use that. These are just best practices, and a affordable housing fund is really critical for covering those expenses, associated with preparing a development plan, development concept for affordable housing. A zoning for lower lot size requirements. Adapted reuse of structures that outlive their lives, looking at strip malls or office buildings. And then there's also the long-term strategy that could be a consideration to expanding existing infrastructure. Another activity we did was coordinating with other committees and commissions. We coordinate with planning and zoning commissions. There's an update from the housing committee that became a standing item on the planning and zoning agenda to promote enhanced cooperation and coordination. And that coordination is really facilitated because I am also a member of planning and zoning. So I'm able to report every month, what we're doing. So they know, because we're so interconnected in what we do. And we also talked to them about, the potential of amending the opportunity housing, the new zoning that came in, to include like the Dev 1 area, the business area, so we could promote mixed use. We work with the commission on the use of publicly owned properties, CUPOP. So we're analyzing the finalized CUPOP town-owned property list that includes the 44 properties under Category 3 for potential housing opportunities. Task Force 2030, we met with the co-chair to review their placemaking strategies, because their plan also includes incremental mixed-use development, and they're looking at identifying and modifying zoning to allow residential mixed use. So we have to coordinate these efforts, because we're right now we're kind of working in silos, and we're trying to work together. Participating with SCROG's Housing Task Force. I have to say these meetings have been really informational. They give great technical assistance to help the towns to promote affordable housing, and if anybody is interested in any of these sessions, they're recorded. I could send the videos, and you could become informed on some of these approaches that are being promoted through SCROG. Some notable meetings was the nitty-gritty details of wastewater management, and that was really interesting discussing the state of the art in septic and other technologies for wastewater treatment, converting strip malls into housing, and also housing and open space. Can towns have both? And yes, we can have both, and we're working hard to do that. Another activity was promoting community conversation. We spent a lot of time on doing that to promote awareness and understanding of the need for housing and listen to different perspectives to develop a common ground and just to identify and understand barriers. We worked with Ben Fink. He's a facilitator that was hired through SCROG to help us promote this effort, and these community conversations have been very positive in offering a forum. And I have to say, overall, participants in these conversations expressed the need for creating housing that is attainable for people to become part of and to remain in Woodbridge. So we did have, a couple recommendations in that September report from 2023. We talked about how Woodbridge would benefit from a town planner who plays a crucial role in town and regional development while providing that professional perspective and being a consistent source of information. And I'm happy to see that's moving forward, that the town has an RFP for that. The Woodbridge needs to create a welcoming environment for developers who can provide affordable housing, and having a planner on board can certainly lend to that situation. Some incentives that the town could do, providing town-owned land for development, permitting fee waivers, tax abatements, density bonuses. Those are just different incentives we could do for promoting affordable housing. And then the other recommendation we had at the time was that Woodbridge needs to encourage better coordination across the committees and commissions. So just quickly to update what we've been doing from October to current date through March. We did hold a community conversation at Temple Emmanuel on October 3rd, which was very well attended and included participants from throughout the region, and that really provided a broader perspective on housing needs. We participated in Woodbridge Like Me Day. We spearheaded the training, the required training for land use officials to be a public event at the JCC, and we arranged for the guest speaker who had the expertise in land use and environmental law. We provided additional input to COOPOP on the use of town-owned property. We communicated and met with the Connecticut Department of Housing, SCROG, and we met with SCROG's grant technical assistance consultants, because we're looking for funding to how to implement the affordable housing plan. So if you see and we also met with the partnership to explore planning capacity resources. So there's a common theme here, and that is we need professional help to do this next stage, to move the agenda forward. We participated in a summit on land use and affordable housing, which acknowledged that state policies need to be more in line to address the lack of affordable housing. And that was a big discussion point at that summit. We invited Tim Austin to do a presentation of Woodbridge Greenway to ensure recommendations for the use of town-owned properties, to make sure that the recommendations are coordinated and supportive of both goals of housing and conservation. We prepared an article on accessory dwelling units for publication in the town's newsletter. And then last meeting, we met with Ben Lovejoy, who is formerly from SCROG, who was recently appointed to Department of Housing to help towns implement their affordable housing plans and provide support. And we gave him a list of areas where the state could help us in. And I'm just going to very quickly go through that. Writing text zoning amendments to update regulations, utilizing the HOME program, and that's a federal subsidy program that helps create affordable housing. The idea here was we had recent zoning changes that permit two-unit duplexes, throughout Woodbridge. You could have a developer subsidy that can make one of the units affordable. Expanding public water sewer infrastructure, advocating for the New Haven Regional Water Pollution Control Authority to do a study in Woodbridge, you know, doing a factual, objective study in Woodbridge can inform as to where infrastructure can and cannot occur, and in a manner that will not impact the public water supply watershed. Again, repurposing underutilized vacant office space and commercial buildings. Preservation of affordable housing. You know, we focus on increasing affordable housing, but we also have to be cognizant that we keep the limited number of affordable housing that we have to make sure they remain affordable. So, you know, in an event, if there's a sale or something, we just gotta make sure that those units are deed restricted. So we still have those on our account. Promotion of privately owned properties for potential development, you know, looking at privately owned sites. It doesn't have to be all, you know, it doesn't have to be town sites. That might be appropriate for higher density, and then host, you know, information session for property owners to promote development ideas. So maybe I'm gonna stop here before I go into, you know, the next part was just responding to comments by a couple residents. I know I put a lot out there, and I don't know if there's any areas you want me to dig a little deeper in.
Questions, comments?
Are we able to?
Yes, this isn't public comment, this is an
Okay.
agenda item. She's here specifically to answer our questions and
Okay.
have an exchange, so.
I mean, I hope you can see this is a multifaceted approach. I know we've had, you know, some remarks that we're fixated on the Woodbridge Country Club. We are not fixated on the Woodbridge Country Club. We are trying to do many different approaches because we need, you know, a major supply of affordable housing. So it's going to be, you know, a composite of different strategies that it's gonna work for Woodbridge. And it's certainly, you know, the Woodbridge Country Club is gonna, that's a long range, you know, as to what happens to that property. So we are very much, you know, looking at other things, other options in town.
Do you have examples of municipalities that established and manage an affordable housing fund?
Yes, I do, and I could provide that. And I could have somebody come here and talk to you how to set that up. Because that is it's really important and would really help.
Could I just interject that the town of Westport passed an affordable housing plan last month? So we've been involved in that particular.
Yeah, Westport just set up their fund, and New Canaan has also done so a few years ago, which we were also involved in, so.
Fairfield
Happy to
has
help.
one, Greenwich, but we were involved in those two. New
And-
Canaan and
Any sense for
Westport.
how they fund it?
Yeah, how is it funded?
Land use fees, basically.
So
Land use
taxing.
fees, so when there's a little bit of variation from town to town, but at least Westport's model is, pretty much, it's a scale of what construction costs will be for anything that you need to go to the zoning department to get a permit for. It's a percentage of like X amount per construction costs, and then that feeds into a fund that's earmarked for use for what, you know, these types of purposes.
Thank you.
So that's on the developer to
Yeah.
pay.
Correct.
Yeah, that's similar
So-
to Guilford.
Yeah.
And are
Go
they
for it.
finding that these, because another goal was to make it easier and incentivize developers' engagement in town. Have these towns been finding if that fund impacts or contradicts that goal in practice at all?
We will be finding out in
It's
Westport,
too soon.
since they literally just passed
Okay.
it. New Canaan,
Yeah. They have 3 large 830G projects pending in court right now in New Canaan, but my observation is that there's been a reasonable amount of regular applications, development requests. So I haven't seen it stopping development in New Canaan, and at Westport it's too new.
Well, I kind of like that the onus isn't so much on the taxpayer.
Can I ask like more of a context question, right? So it sounds like some of these suggestions, and Kathy, your group has been doing a lot of work, and you've put some documents in front of us now. I wonder if the Board of Selectmen can first think of what our role is, right? So my understanding of the Housing Committee is you're making recommendations to the Board of Selectmen for a variety of things, and now you have some in front of us. So I'm wondering if these should be incorporated in the town's official housing plan that we had passed back at that initial deadline. Some of what's here, I didn't see it in the original plan, so forgive me if I missed it, but if it's there or if these are new ideas, how would we first put them into the housing plan, maybe take that to a public hearing, which we did not have when we initially created that plan and filed it with the state, because maybe this is the opportunity to gather input from people. We said at the time we passed it on a very tight deadline to get it in before it was due, that we would consider changes to the plan itself. So that plan document, I would really like to see recommendations from your group and from other groups and from the public as to how we might amend that plan, and then go from there. If we all decide we're amending that plan, then we have more of a blueprint. Well, we're gonna do it with a housing authority or an effort to preserve affordable housing that already exists, or let that plan guide some of this so that the public can see it in the full context. Does that make sense for a strategy? And I don't know if the attorneys can tell us if anyone else has updated their affordable housing plan since filing in June 1st.
Not that I
2021.
recall, I mean, we certainly can, but I'm not aware, I mean, everyone was on the time crunch.
Yeah.
And since then, I think, at least the Westport zoning commission, there's a subcommittee that's considering those aspects, but I'm not aware of a change that's actually.
And is that a subcommittee of there's TPZ?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was one of the options for a subcommittee of TPZ to do work. This committee that you're chairing, Kathy, even though you have a role on both boards, your committee is not a subcommittee of TPZ. It's just advisory to us. So I don't know how we get things back to TPZ. It seems a little, and that was one of my questions. You were saying that you've been providing updates and input to TPZ for zoning reg changes, but you're really supposed to be making them to us, and then we make them to TPZ? I'm not sure what.
Well,
Actually,
I'm
I think-
also a member of planning and zoning, so.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I
Yeah,
don't-
if I have recommendations, then.
Yeah, I don't know.
I believe what was said was that you're providing updates as part of the agenda to TPZ, has an updates from the Housing Commission, or Housing Committee, and that's what you're providing, so.
Recommendations for zoning changes, I think.
We had discussed the recommendations, in terms of, you know, encouraging, mixed-use development in the business district, that we should add Dev 1 to the housing opportunities.
Right, so the idea of maybe getting
Update from the
EDC.
Housing Committee became a standing item on the planning and zoning agenda is what's stated in here.
Right.
So that's what I assume that you're doing, an update, the update of
Right,
Housing
we
Committee.
are updating,
Right.
and you have to, you know, I mean.
A little different than recommendation, I don't
have-
mean to interrupt,
yeah,
but give me
yeah.
an opportunity. From my perspective, the whole intent of her being here is specifically for us to start to determine exactly what we need to do going forward on our housing plan, so that is
Yeah.
part of the plan. As far as what we do with TPZ, we do what we always do with TPZ. If there's a recommendation we want to do with TPZ, we contact TPZ, we have them in, or we give a recommendation as to what they wanna do. I don't see
We,
that
the
as
Board of
changing.
Selectmen.
Yes, when
Okay.
I say we, the Board of Selectmen, so I don't see that changing. Our role is our role, that's our function, that's what we do. We get recommendations from the Housing Committee specifically, so we're in a position to determine what we wanna do. If that includes updating the housing plan, that's what we do. But in order to do that, from my perspective, we need to have discussion, we need to have dialogue, we need to understand what's going on, and this is a first step in doing that, is
Absolutely.
obviously reading the plan, understanding the documentation, seeing where you are, and so from September to now, we're new, okay? So we don't have some of the background that you and David have from that perspective. So just so we're clear as to what I see from an objective standpoint, from my perspective, is we are in the process of identifying what we need to do as this board moving forward from a housing perspective. And if that includes changing the housing plan, we will go to Kathy and the committee and say, we would like to make some changes to this, and we do need to make some changes. There are some updates that I think we've already discussed need to be made. And so the intent is, okay, when do we do them, how do we do them? The POCD is coming, that's gonna play into this. Do do we do everything and then go to the POCD, or do we make changes as part of the POCD process?
Yeah, I mean, I will talk to that in some of the comments, but I have to say, if you read the strategies, in the affordable housing plan, we have, it's probably like 75 strategies, so I would say mostly everything we were talking about here is incorporated in some way into those strategies.
I guess one of the comments you made was about the different silos, and I think the piece that you just mentioned as well, Mika, kind of highlights so changes to the business district. We also have the EDC that is going to consider
Yeah,
the
but my-
zoning implications down in the business district. So if we're going to have more mixed use versus more housing allowed that's not currently allowed, that impacts what can happen in the business district. So it's sort of, the reason why there are various groups engaging on pieces of this is to bring recommendations back to the Board of Selectmen.
But they shouldn't be doing it in silos.
We
That's
just
the whole
want it
intent
together.
of our strategic plan, that's the whole intent of.
Well, no,
that's one of
we're the
biggest-
center, so it's not silos, it's spokes in a wheel more, and you
Okay,
come back to
okay, I'm
us.
sorry, you
Does
said
that-
silos, yeah.
No,
the whole
Kathy
intent-
mentioned that there are silos, and then if you envision the Board of Selectmen as the center of that, and all the spokes are leading back to us, then it's okay that you are doing your piece, EDC is gonna do their piece, Conservation will do theirs, et cetera, et cetera. But it all
But
comes
I'd
back to
like-
us.
I'd like that to happen with our direction, exactly. So we need to hear from, housing, we need to hear from EDC, we need to hear from TPZ, and we need to understand, and then we need to assess how we want to move forward and what we want to do. So, again, and I apologize for not kind of setting the groundwork, I apologize to you and to everyone for not setting the groundwork in terms of what we're doing. This is a step in the process. This is our way of this becoming our plan, or of us identifying how we want to work this plan, what we want to do with this plan. But the plan itself is based on information that was collected that helps us to come to these conclusions.
Yeah.
And as I say, I think there are some things that need to change. I think there's going to continue to be things that need to change, but we need to identify exactly how we want to go about that. So the first portion of this is information. Let's figure it out. Let's ask the questions we need to ask so we can make some assessments. Andrea?
I agree with that. I appreciate that approach. I also think we need, I personally need time to review this plan, especially in the context with public comments we've been hearing from all ends of the spectrum. In fact, do my due diligence in sourcing information and data, and understanding the sources of data and information before I can support any addition of a plan into,
No action is expected.
Okay.
This is information. This is for us to hear what's being done and for us to ask questions so that we can better understand it and so we can put ourselves in a better position to determine how we want to move forward.
Yeah.
The next step will be EDC does need to be a part of this process. TPZ absolutely has to be a part of this process. So, but we have to start here. David, I'm sorry.
No, I just, for the benefit of the current board, which is all new since this happened, when this plan was being made, we were still doing meetings remotely. It was under COVID, which obviously had a limit on their ability. It made it harder for them, no doubt. But it also had a limit on what the public was going to be able to comment on. And I joined very late because I was new to the board at that time. I hadn't had the advantage of hearing from them before. But when we got the plan, it was about less than a week before it had to be filed. And so did the public. And it's a 96-page document. So it was put up at that board meeting. It was the only board meeting that I experienced in all of our Zoom calls where we had more than 2 people call in to talk about things. And we had something like 20 people who just asked that we not do it right away, that we give more public input. So the board decided to go ahead and move forward on the plan. I have no comment on the you know, I'm not saying it was not a good or bad plan, I'm just saying this is what happened historically. And we turned out to be I think we were in a minority of towns, more than half the town didn't file it on time, as it turned out. Probably for the same reasons that we didn't feel like we had a lot of time to consider it, because everybody was under the crunch of trying to do meetings without even being able to sit together in a room, so.
Yeah, I'd like to speak about the, public review, because we tried, and it was very difficult, because it was during COVID. We tried extremely hard to get all that information out for review. It was posted on our website. We had 2 virtual public hearings, and we had an in-person public hearing in March, where we actually were able to sneak in an in-person hearing so people could comment on there.
But that wasn't, I'm sorry, Kathy, but that wasn't the draft of the report. That was the consultant had brought recommendations, but that wasn't the report itself. I think David's talking about commenting on the report.
If you just let me finish what I'm saying. That we had, that report is a composite of different sections. When you talk about it's a 97-page report, that's because we had a survey. We had the Scroggs survey. We had our local survey. We had our conditions and uses information. All that information was on the website for months. So everybody had a chance to review that, as well as affordable housing goals were up there. We had our strategies that were part of the PowerPoint that we presented in March. So when we did our plan, it was really putting all that information together that was already out for public consumption. So to say that the whole plan in its entirety, because it wasn't like all together wasn't reviewed, it's kind of, because we most, I would say 90% of that plan was out there before that final plan was put together. So people did have the opportunity to review it. So the thought that this is like the first time we had 97 pages, thrown in front of us and we just didn't have the time, that's
I appreciate it, but what I'll say is, from my perspective, that's not as important as, to me it's important so as to help us not make the same mistakes from that perspective. I understand what you're saying, and when I looked at the report and I looked at, when I first looked at it, the first thing you do is you say 96 pages, like, oh my God. But then when you read the report, you realize the content in it is one thing, and then the examples and the graphs and the statistics and everything else is a large piece of it as well.
Right, and that was
which
all out there.
It's different, but I think it is important. We do want to do things where we are us. So we'll do things however this board feels is the most appropriate way. And one of the things that we will do is make sure that it's something that people understand and it's communicated as well as we can. But I'd like to move forward. So I feel like we have a great basis, similar to what we did with the strategic plan. It was great to have the document. Now let's figure out how we best make use of what we have. And what needs to change, we change. What needs to adjust, we adjust, and we move forward from there. So what I'd like to make sure we understand here, if you've got questions related to our housing position or our housing plan or thing, that's what I'd like us to more or less focus on.
One question I have is, I perceive it to be maybe an elephant in the room, maybe not, but is the mixed in messaging between the state law. Page 12 says to reach the state's mandated 10% requirement. To my understanding of the law, that is not a state mandated requirement.
Right, that's a
So
comment.
if this is in the plan that the town adopted, I have concerns about not addressing some potential erroneous information and accurate information in a meaningful and deliberate way. I'm not sitting here, Kathy, and thinking that not trying to bash the hard work.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I do wanna address the comments, because I could.
Well, that comment, and
Yeah,
not the
yeah,
comments,
actually that
but
comment.
the law and its representation in this plan, a now adopted plan, and in the communication to the public.
Yeah, well, if you could allow me to address
Yes.
exactly that comment, because that's what I wanted to first start off with. Because there was concern that there was a reference to a state mandated 10% requirement of affordable housing. And that's the reference on page 12. But if you read the plan, you know, on page 8, there is, and I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds here, so bear with me, because it's really important, and it bears explanation. When you read page 8, there is a comprehensive explanation of what 8-30G is. And what 8-30G is basically for towns that don't have a 10% affordable housing stock. If a developer is denied building affordable housing, he can appeal to override the local zoning, and then the burden of proof gets placed on the town to prove that there's a significant health or safety concern. So there was a major explanation about that 10%. And also on page 11 of the affordable housing plan, it goes again talking about the affordable housing land use appeals process, and it goes through explanation. So, but on page 12, the last sentence, you know, speaks to the effort of reaching the state's mandated 10% requirement. And if you read that sentence in isolation of all the preceding pages, if you just jump to page 12, then yes, it's incorrect, because it should really state that the 10% requirement is in relation to averting an 8-30G appeal. So we could certainly, you know, change that next time we do an update, or we could do an addendum to say, on page 12, we have to change this to read this.
Based on conversations we've had in the past about that specific item, it's not we could, it's we will. It's, we recognize that that's not correct.
I haven't heard that.
And we will.
Okay,
You know, and I have the benefit of having had those conversations
Okay.
and bringing up these points, because when they're brought up, obviously, in public comment, we are calling and we are looking into them and trying to find information. So yes, that's an item that absolutely will be cared for, because it, in the context that it's written there with just on its own, it's not right. You're absolutely right. Kathy's admitted, you know, Kathy said that that's the case. She explained to me that it's in the context of 10%. If you're not there, now you're open to 830G type of thing, so.
Right. I mean, 10% is a goal that the state puts forth.
Mika,
But it's
that-
not a mandate. It is not a mandate.
Sheila's right, my comments were about the actual report that we received in a
Yes.
very short period of time to look at it. No doubt, something erroneous would have been picked up, or something that would have
Right.
been something that we didn't want to put into our housing plan because it may not have been right.
So I was trying to discredit anyone's
My
approval.
point to
of
the
it.
board was
I
only
understand
that, my point to the board was only that in a time when we had nobody interested in coming to see our meetings, and we had effectively shut the town out of most processes, and I know that they were working hard to get town input, it wasn't there for most things until we hit upon this, and we probably had 20 times as many people show up for that actual Zoom meeting to talk about, can we hold off? They weren't making particular criticisms of the plan, they just said, can we look at it more thoroughly, because we think that this is too long for us to absorb. And
And I view this as our opportunity, David. This is our opportunity to tweak it, and I mean, there's things I'm sure the committee has learned that they might want to either add or take off. I'm sure there's things that, you know, changes that can be made and should be made.
Yeah.
You know, from my perspective, I think this is our opportunity to take advantage of that and be able to do that.
So with that in mind, and I know the hour's getting late, so there are a lot of proposals here, and they probably need to be considered and kind of rank ordered, and you know, like, we'll all need to try to understand how they fit together. Is this because these are gonna touch on many of our strategic plan items, I wonder if this is the kind of thing that we should take a close look at in a strategic plan meeting, and then come back to the full board, invite the housing committee back, have a further discussion once
Yes.
we can sort of get our hands around this.
Absolutely, yes, that's exactly
So,
what I envision.
But
in
do you
terms
think the
of-
strategic planning group is the right group to start that
I
with,
think
just so
because
we
we
can
have
get
this,
moving?
because we have the strategic planning group and it does fit into the strategic plan, I think that's a great way, but that's up to the other members. And, you know, it's a lesser group, we can look at it, but the whole, I think, what I see this as is a guide, and I do think we need to prioritize. We need to prioritize with input from you, from EDC, from TPZ, in terms of what we want to do. But yeah, I think that's a great way to do it, is to start with this strategic plan group. But what I want to make sure is, Kathy's here now. Do we have questions? You know, is there something that we can learn more from Kathy in terms, that would help us in getting to something that we all feel good about and that the public has been a part of? Maria?
I do have a question for Kathy, and one point on the strategic planning, as we're absorbing this, to come up with, you know, some actionable items along that timeline that we could use towards, the recommendations of the committee.
Yeah,
You
because
know,
there's costs involved too, so we
Right.
have to.
So
What can
we'd
we
have to
do?
consider that, but along the lines of cost, what were some of the other funding sources that SCROG proposed when they came and presented, to fund, you know, an affordable housing fund, or any of the other, you know, tax credits, the other, items that you mentioned in here as potentials, along with the plan?
Well, in terms of the, you know, affordable housing fund, you know, Guilford just adopted inclusionary zoning, and within that, they have, you know, a opt-out provision. So you could opt out, you know, based on the amount, and I think it's calculated on the permitting fees. So that's another way of, you know, funding a, you know, if there's a requirement that you have to have a certain amount of, you know, affordable housing in your multifamily development. If you don't wanna do that, then you have to pay a fee, and that's another way of funding that.
Okay.
So it's, you know, the same, and the same methods, that our attorneys are talking about. There's many different, you know, methods you could adopt, you know, and there's different incentives as well.
And have incentives come through from the state or from the federal government to help
there's
municipalities with this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, I mean, you're not gonna do affordable housing without public subsidies, you know, the idea, I mean, there's some, there's some projects where you could like do a number of market rate developments to underwrite the cost of the affordable units, and you could do that with higher density developments. That is workable, but a lot of these projects are very heavily subsidized, so it takes a very complicated capital stack to you know, do these developments. You can't just like ask, you know, a developer after the plan's already done, oh, couldn't you put affordable housing units in there? And it's like, no, you can't do that. You know, that's not how it works. You have to, you know, the financing for affordable housing takes sometimes, you know, it takes years to put a project together. It's not an easy enterprise.
Thank you.
Can you help me better understand the approaches the committee has taken to considering open space needs and other state guidelines surrounding the need to protect open space, to reduce fragmentation, to acquire, you know? So I see you invited Tim Austin and had that consultation about the green plan, but in addition to that, tell me how that's factoring into this plan and how
I mean, we are participating in the summits that the Connecticut Conservation Council is doing,
great.
and they're trying to promote, you know, working together, you know, because they acknowledge that Connecticut has a problem with affordable housing. So how can we work together? And there's lots of examples of how, you know, the housing, how housing trust funds could work together to promote affordable housing. You know, cluster housing, you know, cluster housing is environmentally friendly. If you do if you have like a large piece of property and you do cluster housing,
Right.
you know, then you could have a lot of land for open space. So that's a way of doing housing.
So that's in the context of new development. And it is certainly more environmentally friendly than cookie cutter lots distributed throughout the whole lot. relative to that space remaining the same or not housing, it's obviously not more environmentally friendly, but here we're trying to achieve multiple goals in this scenario. Are there ways, or can you help me or speak to the effort to promote opportunity without new development? Or
Well,
in
we're looking-
addition to new development?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just new development, we're looking, as we spoke, we look to repurposing, existing buildings that have just outlived their use, so, you know, you look at in business district, and you could like envision, you see some malls strip malls that aren't really being totally utilized, you see some office buildings that have a lot of vacant space. Well, these are potential opportunities to, you know, repurpose it for housing. So it's not just, you know, in the idea that we're being lazy and just looking at one thing. No, we are looking at so many
I wasn't suggesting
things.
that. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to, in no way was I suggesting
No,
that.
I know,
I just
I'm not
want
talking about
a better understanding of the options, I
Yeah, no,
guess.
there's
And
lots of
There's,
options.
there's, for example, some of the things we've taken a look at ourselves, and, you know, from a staff standpoint as well, is looking at the business district. Chris came up and gave us an overview in terms of the business district and different zones. And there's a number of zones there's a number of areas down there. It's amazing because it's a puzzle piece. It's really just a hodgepodge of different type zones and things. But a number of them now allow, for example, a perfect example is in case you didn't know, the trailer company that's down there is, the owner has decided he wants to sell the property, so they need to move. So that's gonna leave that open to whoever comes in. Well, that does have the ability for multi-use. In other words, it could be business on the first floor and residential on the second floor. So that's an opportunity. That's a great opportunity for us to do something that's a little bit different than it's been done before. But in order to do that, obviously, there's a outreach, there's a communication, there's incentives that need to be considered, things of that nature. Again, where the EDC comes in, again, where these things start to merge and why we can't be in silos. You're now, you know, same thing holds true for where the Katz's is. Believe it or not, that area is also zoned for business, but you can't put residential over the business there. Is that the best thing to do? I'm not saying it is or it isn't. All I'm saying is that the changes that have been made, we need to leverage in a way that we can take advantage of, the best advantage. It's all private property, so it all depends on what the seller wants to do. But it's something that if there's a way for us to influence that, we're gonna try. And you know, but the beginning of it comes with an understanding of what we can do, and then the next part comes in making sure we educate people as to what's available and hopefully work with them to see if we can figure out a way to make some of that happen. But it's really a multi-pronged approach in terms of affordable housing.
I'd imagine there's opportunity in the context of another statement made by someone tonight, that opportunity to educate homeowners on their options, on the new zoning regulations.
Totally agree.
And this can dovetail easily into that potentially, if you've assessed that ADUs is a potential avenue to help.
It is part of a multifaceted approach. ADUs, you know, it's wonderful providing, you know, housing options. And the small A affordable housing is not gonna add to the affordable housing count that under the State Housing Appeals Act in order for us to reach, you know, a certain number to avert, you know, a 8-30G appeal. Unless someone agrees with, to put a deed restriction on the ADU. And, you know, the idea of, you know, providing a tax incentive to do that is a good idea. And that would be a way to adding, you know, a couple more units onto the Housing Appeals Act. You know, I don't see that being, you know, a massive amount of number, but it is something. So if you get like, you know, potentially 10, 20 units on there in addition to what we, you know, are 30 units right now, you know, that would be a good thing.
We will do everything we can,
Yeah.
everything we have done in the past to try to promote this more, particularly the ADUs, but the other zoning regs as well. But the ADUs is something significant. I was encouraged in talking to Scrog. They were telling me the story about how they were talking to another community and used us as an example in terms of what we're doing with our ADUs, and how surprised, and you know, they were, the other communities were like, wow, Woodbridge is doing that. So the fact that Scrog is out there, is out there promoting it, we're gonna try to get creative in terms of what we do, how we communicate. It's something we absolutely have every intention of trying to do. I'll be the first to take a hit in terms of, you know, bringing my head up from budgets and things of that nature, you know, but now's the time. We're at that time. We've done what we did our job in terms of the budget, now we move on, and this is one of the things we'd like to move on with. I'd like to see us move on with, so.
So Kathy, with the ADUs, they would need an affordability deed restriction on them to count towards
Yeah.
the goal? Okay.
But truly, that's for them to count toward the goal. They do
Right.
address
They do
an
address-
affordable housing
Yeah.
situation. I mean, it
Right.
becomes an affordable home, so from that perspective, but it does not tally. You know, you don't get the check mark necessarily, but,
Well, I guess they want to prevent people from then taking that and reselling that ADU as not affordable or what
Right.
have you, so that
Right, I
keeps
mean,
it in
the
that
idea
count.
is, you know, if it's gonna be affordable, it has to stay affordable in order to count towards the Housing Appeals Act list.
I know that there was a lot of legislation making its way through Hartford, particularly in the middle of COVID and on the issue of affordable housing.
I know
And
it's
are
big
we
now.
tracking that? Is there a lot of change still?
Oh,
in the-
yeah, I mean, it's, housing is.
Because it does seem like one of the things that's a big stumbling block is, you know, if we did get to a lot of affordable housing, but we didn't have all of the pieces on it that were in the legislation, it doesn't really help from the perspective of the way you're viewed by the regulators. But, you know, the deed restriction seems to be a hangup for a lot of people. And I understand perhaps the need for it, but, is that something that's gonna always be there, do you think?
Yes, I would say so. No, that's the attorneys, I would think, I don't see any other way to call it permanent affordable housing, without having a deed restriction, because the idea is, you know, it's gotta be there for people.
that shouldn't stand in our way of doing something,
Yeah.
doing other,
It
exploring.
just makes it
other
harder.
options.
Yeah,
It shouldn't stop us from exploring the other options that are
So
available.
one
But
of the other pieces though that I think, you know, as a board, we're still in the budget process. You know, our role in the budget setting this time is already done. But we're still gonna be talking to the public about
Sure.
the budget process. And one of the things that we've always talked about is diversifying and growing the grant list. The diversifying piece of that is making sure that we can expand our business district. So the idea of, in our town, where we're primarily, the burden is on residential property, if we're going to take property that was earmarked or, you know, right now zoned for business and convert it with the thinking that, oh, we have a need for housing, which we have. But the question is, are we going to undiversify ourselves even further?
Well,
And is that a risky financial move for our town? So I guess it's all in the context of individual towns. You know, Westport has different needs, they have a much bigger business district than we do, et cetera. So this is what we'll have to balance.
Yeah, and it's not only a balance, it's collecting data. The data is really important because there's also data that supports when you have residents in a business district, more businesses will come.
Only if you open up new square footage, though. I mean, if you take all the business square footage away
Well, you're
and
not-
then put people there and there's no
The
place to
zones don't
build.
allow for us to take square footage away.
Well, no,
in
we
other
change the use.
But I'm saying, for example, the changes that were made allow for residential on top of business. So you're not taking the business,
You wouldn't
Square
convert
footage.
existing,
right, it's the square
Office
footage,
space.
the bottom floor has to be business. So
Okay.
you're not taking that square footage
right,
away.
but the second floor right now that is currently office space in
No,
some
so it's-
buildings.
No, if you're talking about like the areas that I'm talking, the examples that I gave are one-story structures. Like Katz's doesn't have a second floor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what I'm talking about. If Starbucks wanted to put residences above, I think they can.
They have something.
You know what I mean? Right, but
Sure.
something's up there, but,
Yeah.
right.
I have always wondered.
Mysterious, there's no windows, but yeah.
What is up there?
So, but at any rate, I think it affords opportunity, and there certainly is, from an EDC standpoint, if you look at some of the statistical information, if you have people who are in the community, who are able to walk the businesses, there are gonna be more businesses. We do have square footage in this, in the context of property owners. There are property owners down there, there's a lot of open, not a lot, there is some open space in the business district that can be expanded, and we need to, again, and we are looking, this is a charge that ADC has recently been given,
Yeah.
is the charge is to, let's start the property owner outreach to identify what they're waiting for. What is it that, why haven't you developed your property in the last 30 years?
Right, because there was an effort in the TPZ back about 5 or 6 years ago to change zoning in like Research Drive and Bradley Road and in there to allow those very large front lawns to be built
Right.
for more, but I think that was withdrawn after public hearing, so.
Some of what the zoning allows, like for example, residences over existing businesses type thing, if you combine that with some of what 2030 has done as relates to, and you get funding that's necessary to really expand your sidewalks and control the traffic and do some signage that's specific, all those come together, now all of a sudden you're building a very vibrant business district. All of this is, that's why it's so important that we get our commissions all working toward the same type of goal. And that's our mission. That's what we need to do, is what I feel.
Yeah, bring us data so that we can try to figure out how they fit together.
And how best to go about this. So,
Great.
I didn't mean to take up so much of your time. I think we've answered most of the questions, and in the interest of time, is there something else you feel you need to say?
Well, I mean, there was some other comments, I don't know, I was gonna spend some time addressing the comments, but if you're good, I'm good.
I feel it's important that we do address the comments.
All right, so
We can
let me just go through, because I wanted to go through, the comments that were made and just, talk about them. But in terms of, not having a 10% requirement, perhaps for our next update to the Affordable Housing Plan, there is a requirement in the Zoning Enabling Act, and the Zoning Enabling Act allows towns to regulate land use. And that was updated in 2021 to make it stronger. So the Zoning Enabling Act requires Woodbridge to promote housing choice and economic diversity in housing, including housing for low and moderate income households, and it also requires Woodbridge to address significant disparities in housing needs to educational, occupational, and other opportunities. So that was in the updated Zoning Enabling Act. So there is a requirement from that standpoint in terms of promoting. And like, we don't put a number on promoting, but I could tell you 1% is not promoting. Other comments by two residents expressed concerns about outdated and inaccurate information that was in the Affordable Housing Plan in terms of our school population and wage information on certain occupations. And again, just to be clear, the state does require that we update our Affordable Housing Plan every 5 years. So when this plan was being worked on, the information was, they were using, 2019, 2020 data, which was pre-COVID data. So COVID did have some impact on our demographics, and that's true. But, the fundamental thing that needs to be understood in the overall plan strategies that we came up with, it did not depend on these particular data points. What's really a driving factor in Woodbridge is that we only have 1% affordable housing stock. So our strategies really, respond to that data point, not whether or not, the school population is actually increasing by 5 students, or, I'm just making, I know
Understand.
the school population was increasing, not decreasing, but that did not impact our strategies. What impacted our strategies was the fact that we don't have, affordable housing. There was a concern, and the concern was that we have information that is outdated, and that would then be used for our planning process for the town plan of conservation and development, which, as you know, you just approved the firm tonight. I did, because I'm on planning and zoning, I attended the session on Monday night on their presentation, and I asked the question because I wanted to be wanted to respond to folks about these questions. And I asked, are you, going to be are you gonna be reliant on, 2019, 2020 data that, to inform your plan, or are you gonna be updating all the demographics that we use? And they are gonna be updating all the demographics. So I do think, for the sake of saving expense, I would, have them update the demographics, and then, and that could be used to update our affordable housing plan, instead of like, doing these separate updating efforts.
Appreciate it.
Kathy, do you mean the school demographics or the town demographics?
Both.
Because I think
Yeah.
both school districts have contracts with demographers who update their stats, so maybe we'll gather those documents.
In general, Kathy, for whatever it's worth, if you were to do it again, I would use Woodbridge demographics. It's really the bottom line. I understand what you're saying in terms of your charge, and you were specific to your charge, but I also understand the concern of the demographics not relating to Woodbridge, and it would, for future reference, if you're doing it again.
I believe they did use Woodbridge.
No, well, I'll look at it again.
Okay, well, that was, that was.
But there's information there that conflicts with what we know. Our school population isn't going down, our school population is going up. That type of thing is all I'm saying. So,
Yeah,
but go on,
Yeah, they
please.
use American Community Survey data, so that's, data that planners use, so I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, so that's the data. In terms of the ADUs, we had tried to, even before this was brought to our attention, we had efforts to try to get a column in the Woodbridge Town News to try to publicize the work of our housing committee, to talk about ADUs and talk about the duplexes that are now available throughout Woodbridge. And we were just unsuccessful. That's all I could say is I just could not, get them to
We'll help with that.
do a column. And so it wasn't like being lazy or not without trying. We really tried to do that. But like we said, we did prepare an article that I hope that goes out in the town's newsletter. I also reached out to a former housing committee member who's a realtor, because the comment was made that realtors didn't know anything about it, or one realtor didn't know anything about it, and so, he advised he absolutely knew about the changes, but that it would be a good idea to talk to realtors, because it's good for selling a house, if people know that they have the potential of building an ADU. So he was gonna work on getting that messaging out when he's, part of the Woodbridge Rotary Club, and so I think he will be a good source.
Thank you.
The other concern that was brought up by a resident was a need to have a build-out analysis in light of the zoning amendments that went into effect a couple years ago. And so again, I had the opportunity on Monday night to talk to the firm, and I questioned the firm about updating their build-out analysis. And, their response was like, well, when you're talking about, the amount of duplexes and ADUs in areas built out in large acre lots, that the exercise is more aspirational and doesn't come to fruition. Now, that's their words. That, because I wanted to know, I wanted to understand, because they had a build-out analysis in their prior plan. And he said, it's not worth the cost, but, he said if you really want, a build-out analysis, he could work with SCROG and get the mapping, but it is a costly undertaking. But then, I kept on pressing him, like, well, what about, we had a zoning change, for multi-unit housing, so there was a zoning change that if you have an area that's, served by public water and public sewer, and it's not in the public water supply watershed, you can now build, 15 acres, 15 units per acre. If we have and of course we have very limited land that fits in that category, because 98.4% of Woodbridge's land, you can't have multifamily housing, but in 1.6% there is those conditions where you could have housing. I said, what about doing a build-out analysis, like just looking at that concentrated area? And he said that would be worth the effort. So that was me questioning the SLR, who's gonna be doing our POCD.
Could I just ask really quickly, did you know or engage, while talking on that subject, how long the cited examples this consultant mentioned of it not being cost effective, people to do anything with it, how long those communities had before he made, I think you said he, I don't mean to assume gender, but before he made that claim or finding, conclusion?
Well, he does, you know, POCDs, so they run 10 years, so I imagine he probably did have a, you know,
Yeah.
timeframe to look at that. So I think he's very experienced, seasoned, this is what he does, he's been in the business for a long, long time, so that was his experience. And that's what he said, and you know, you could look at the tape for Monday night. It's on, you know, YouTube, and you know, because I wanted to get the sense of, you know, are you gonna do a build-out analysis, you know, so, because people wanna know this. And that was the answer.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I
yeah.
think we, is there more, or are you good if we?
No, I guess we could say we're good. I mean, there's always more.
Well, I don't expect this to be our last time for us to have the conversation, so, you know,
Okay.
definitely you know, I think the
If
big
we-
thing is for everybody to establish, understand where the housing committee is, and just start to address some of these issues that have come up so that we're in a position to move forward.
Yeah.
And when we do whatever we do next, we all feel like it's the right thing to do. There'll always be some disagreement as far as that's concerned,
Oh, sure.
but I'd like to make sure we address those things that we know for sure we should. So, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mary, Elaine, thank you very much for the work you've put in,
Thank you.
and thank you for coming tonight. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
All right, our next item, is the response, the CCW RFP response. Just wanted to give an update. This is my way of making sure I keep my commitment of keeping the CCW on the agenda every single month.
Good for
So
you.
that we
Yeah.
can get something done. But we did want to provide you an update as to where we are. We do have all 4 meetings scheduled for next week. Myself, Tony, and Karen will be meeting with each of them. Really important. If you have things that you really feel are important, we cover, and there's some things that, you know, that were mentioned today in terms of public comment and in terms of what we have here, that I've made notes for that, you know, that can be included, but please, if there's particular items that you feel are important we cover, or questions that you have, please let us know.
I think Allison said by March 18th or before. Is that Monday? That's Monday.
Did I?
No, that would be fine. If it's by March 18th.
It's fine, yeah.
Well, if you find the email, I do know that I did ask you guys to think of and prepare questions. I'm too tired to tell you what date
I
I
could have
told you at
made
the
that
time,
up
but yeah,
too,
okay.
Allison, who knows, but,
No, that's fine.
Okay.
It works, because our
Okay.
first meeting, I think, is on Monday.
It's on Monday at 11, so
oh,
make
it
sure,
is.
make
All
sure it's
right,
in the
so
morning.
Will you, so you want some time though, right?
Well,
To
if
Yeah.
it's an easy question, if it's a question, like just a question, we can ask the question. you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah.
But you're right, if you can get it to us Sunday night and.
Okay.
Yeah, that
last
would be
night,
better
we
over the
read it.
weekend, yeah.
Or
Yeah.
over the weekend,
Or over
okay.
the weekend,
And to
that'd be
you
great.
too, and Allison maybe, but,
If you
Yeah.
send it to Allison, it'll get to
It
us,
gets to
so,
the right person.
right, right,
no
just
doubt.
so it's all, everybody's going to the same place.
Yeah,
Like,
just send it to Allison, that's
Yeah,
fine.
that way I don't see my email one day and I forget to tell Tony, and he gets
So,
mad.
let me just ask a question, since we have the attorneys here and I just keep doing this to you guys. In the interest of trying to keep this as easy for you guys as possible, I know that we can't discuss by email, but if we can see each other's comments before we, you know, so that we can say, oh, okay, so Andrew's got that one covered, I won't ask the same question. Is it possible for us to see each other's as long as we don't start discussing them?
Let me ask it another way, if I could, and you tell me if this is consistent with what you're thinking. If everyone sends it to Allison, who puts it up on the shared drive, and no one responds to somebody else's email, then it becomes just, here's information. will that help us in terms of making sure we don't get into this email meeting FOI type concern?
What the act says is communication between the board members.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's a little fuzzy. I mean, Sheila, I think there's, I mean, and Ira can jump in too, but that's a few levels of separation, and there is not back and forth dialogue, and it's almost analogous, I might argue, to what FOIA does allow, which is communications related to like an agenda, here's the agenda, here's the notice for the
Right,
meeting,
right.
and so it's sort of like, here's the preliminary packet, everyone take a look at it. You know, I would feel relatively comfortable with that.
So if you send it to Allison, she
I will
posts.
merge all the questions, and then you won't even know who asked what. I'll just merge them all on a questions
Yeah, or just
piece.
put them up, I mean, 'cause we're gonna be in a time crunch.
Make,
Yeah.
Just
only
put them
'cause
up as they come in.
there's so much more I want you to do, so keep it easy.
It's just
just
copying
put
and pasting.
stuff.
It's relatively
That's true.
simple.
That's
Well,
true, I guess you can. do
But
that.
it is us
Either way.
putting them directly into SharePoint?
No, just email it.
All right, that's your preference, okay.
All right? So again, really important,
Yeah.
no exchange. You know, if somebody asks a question, don't, oh, did you mean this, or whatever the case, no exchange, just let's keep it there.
So Mika, does that mean in our April 10th meeting, we'll have a report out?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, it
and
does,
should we
right, Tony,
be,
do you
Yep.
think? Yep.
Is
We'll
it-
at least-
Our meeting.
yeah, it's gonna,
At
that,
least have a
that'll be
significant
long, that could be the
update or
whole,
a
is that the
shortlist.
only agenda item?
Actually, yeah,
There's
if you have a
lots of
short
stuff.
list.
There's the call for
Yeah.
the meeting, there's the April's.
We have a
big
short
one.
list or?
What we expect is at the very least, we'll have a short list. In other words, we may say, two of these, based on our interviews, there's just no reason to talk to two of them, we got these two. We'll
Right.
bring that to here.
Yeah.
Should we consider having them, I don't know, the April agenda is really ambitious.
Yeah.
So it'll be
Let's do
kind of
May.
tough, I think in May, where
Yeah.
we'll have interview, you know, where somebody comes in and actually does a
I will
proposal.
be zooming in that
So, yeah.
May
So,
one, I'm
maybe-
traveling for work in May, so, not,
We have the technology.
I'll
Yes,
be
we also
present.
recently learned that if a board member has to zoom in, it does not have to be a hybrid meeting. It is just a regular meeting, and it's no different than back in the day when you had the speaker
Speakerphone.
box and a board member could call
Oh,
in.
that's
So we don't have to file
Okay.
our agendas differently or
Okay.
credit.
Yeah, it doesn't magically turn it into now you need to make
Hybrid,
it
it doesn't,
accessible
yeah.
for all
Right.
of the public.
Right, that's good.
Anything else on this?
Can I just ask a question that sort of touches on a few of these things? I know that we're trying to have several meetings coming up. Will we have an opportunity to meet with the attorney or attorneys to just discuss how these various pieces might involve themselves in that pending lawsuit?
I am working on setting up that session separately with myself, Tony, and the attorneys, with Tom Gerard and
Peter Nolan.
Peter Nolan.
Yeah.
Okay, specifically to address some of the concerns that you brought up in terms of making sure where we
Yeah.
are. It's hard to bring everybody, because then it's a meeting, and then it's gotta be noticed, and we're not sure. It's being a challenge. And then we just had this conversation earlier. If it keeps moving out because of attorney schedules, and we get close to the 10th, it'll just be part of our executive session on the 10th.
The date that we have.
Or on the April, is it 10th?
It's April 10th.
April 10th is our
Yeah,
next
the
meeting,
next
and at that meeting, we plan to have an executive session with both Peter Nolan and Tom Gerard
That's
to go over
So we'll get
everything, so we get a
a
full
brief
update on this.
Great.
And if we need to wait until then to have all the other dialogue, we can have it at that point in
Yeah,
time.
and maybe even if that was scheduled at the beginning of the meeting before we even start the public.
It will be,
portion.
because they charge.
Ah.
Not these guys, but. so the other
Good
guys will
incentive,
charge.
guys.
Oh,
No, that's the other guys.
David?
Yeah.
As long as we're sort of discussing April agenda, would it be out of order if I add something?
No,
He's
Okay.
looking at me.
What
would you like to
You may have already heard from Dwight, but the Center Building Committee is going to want to have a special meeting of the board so that they can present all of what they have about their 5 phases to
Okay.
us in something that they think will take much longer than to put it in the April meeting. So that won't be on the agenda, but
Okay.
they will, I think, be asking you to call a special meeting in April.
Yes,
so,
I currently have Dwight on the agenda as a note, so then I'm sure if we need to move that.
we'll see how the agenda shapes up.
okay, so what, are you asking for something else to be put on?
No, I think what
What
we
you're
should
asking.
need to be expecting is that we might have to have a special meeting if that's what you see.
We don't have a meeting every week, I'm gonna miss it, Dave.
Just a quick clarifying question. If you're prepared for the RFPs to come back with maybe an abbreviated list, should we be prepared to vote like, is the goal to have a vote on those on April 10th, or
Here's
play
the
by
way,
ear?
here's kind of the way I look at it, from just from a logistics standpoint. If we're gonna ask you, like, if we interviewed all four, and we were just gonna come back with a report on all four, it's gonna be based on what we write down and what we do. So it's hard for me to imagine that you're not going to think that two of them, the two that we thought were better, are better. So it seems logical just to come to that conclusion, and that's part of our role, that's why we're here,
There may be one that rises
completely to the top.
completely to the top and
So-
three that don't.
The reason that it's so important, that I feel your input is so important, is because that could happen. And if that happens, obviously, we're gonna be in a position where we gotta make sure we can justify, and we clearly communicate how we came to that conclusion. So, I don't know exactly how to answer your question.
Okay, so we'll see how it goes, I guess. I'm just.
Express your concern, though.
Yeah,
'cause I
well,
wanna make
I don't
sure
know that I
address it.
have a concern, I just, it's a big decision for me as
Yeah.
just an individual serving on this board, and
You-
sometimes I like to process information.
You've seen all four proposals.
Yes.
So if you feel, for example, based on those proposals, that you feel there's a particular one that you feel is, well, let us know that you want us to approach that in that way, so that we do our due diligence appropriately. But I don't wanna mislead anybody. Our intent is to narrow this down.
Sure.
Is to get to a place where, okay, we've got one or two, they're gonna come in, they're gonna present to us so that we can, and I can tell you, three of them were really close in terms of their proposal. I gotta feel like we're not gonna go wrong with, anyone we choose, but
Or
you
we
just never
might
know
choose
how.
none of them still, technically. That
You're
is an
absolutely right.
option. I
You're
just wanna,
absolutely
It
okay.
is.
That is absolutely right. If
Okay.
everyone comes back and says, the price is double what it used to be, you're right. There's a lot of reasons.
So I'm thinking I'm hearing your questions about process.
Yes.
So if we hear those proposals, the question is, are we voting the same night we
We're
hear all
hearing
three?
the
Or
feedback.
do we come back at either another meeting, or do we come back the
Let
following
me
week?
ask you a
after
related
process?
question, just to keep it interesting.
Right, was that
Yeah,
what?
We can't go under
thank you.
contract until we've identified the funding source.
Correct.
So there's a transfer request at
Yeah.
the
There's no
easiest?
rush, in other words.
Well, we do, with all deliberate haste, want to get under contract, but we do have to identify how we're funding it.
Right.
We do.
And
We're not-
right now, there's no particular line item that holds enough money unless they come back with amazing prices for you. So there's a funding request that also has to get considered before.
That's correct.
Or we have to hear back on
Which might
the
take some
grant
time.
that we
It
have,
could.
which is
Yeah.
June
Yeah.
timeframe,
But
so.
someone should
Okay.
be able to-
So we're
Yeah.
not in a big hurry, yeah,
I've
so
got
if we,
some ideas.
let's put it this way, I don't intend to have these people come in and then at the end of the session say, let's take a vote.
Okay.
I think we'll push it into the next
Thanks,
meeting,
thank you.
all right?
Yeah, and thanks.
That way we can all
I don't know
consider
how
it
I can
appropriately.
answer your questions.
Anything else?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Hearing no objection, we are adjourned.
Thank you.